The Redwood Massacre. The morning of May 27, 2025, dawned crisp and clear across the Spokane Valley, with Mount Spokane's snow-capped peak gleaming like a beacon against the azure sky. At Redwood Elementary School, located on the eastern edge of the city where suburban development met the wild foothills of the Selkirk Mountains, Principal Margaret Chen stood at her office window, watching the custodial staff prepare for another ordinary Tuesday. The American flag snapped smartly in the morning breeze, and she could hear the distant rumble of school buses beginning their routes through the tree-lined neighborhoods of Pine Ridge Estates. Margaret had been principal of Redwood Elementary for 12 years, having taken the position after spending 15 years as a teacher in the Spokane public school system. At 54, she was a woman of medium height, with graying auburn hair always pulled back in a practical bun, wire-rimmed glasses that had seen countless parent conferences, and a warm smile that could calm even the most anxious first grader. Born Margaret Louise Brennan in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, she had grown up in the wilderness of North Idaho, the daughter of a forest ranger and a school nurse. Her childhood had been filled with camping trips, wildlife encounters, and an intimate understanding of the delicate balance between civilization and the untamed wilderness that surrounded their communities. The bear's position at the cafeteria windows represented the closest he had come to direct contact with the students and staff inside the building. From this location, he could observe the food preparation activities through the windows while detecting the complex mixture of appealing odors that had drawn him to investigate the school property. The glass barrier between GB47 and the interior of the building was substantial, but not designed to withstand the tremendous force that a 700-pound grizzly bear could exert if motivated to gain access to food sources. Maria Gonzalez was working at the preparation counter closest to the windows when she first noticed movement outside. Initially, she assumed that maintenance personnel were working in the area, but when she looked up from the vegetables she was chopping, she found herself making direct eye contact with the massive grizzly bear standing just feet away on the other side of the glass. The shock of the encounter was so profound that Maria's first reaction was a moment of complete paralysis. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing, as the context of a grizzly bear outside an elementary school cafeteria was so far outside normal experience that her brain initially rejected the evidence her eyes were providing. The bear's dark brown eyes, each larger than a silver dollar, were focused directly on her with an intelligence and intensity that was both fascinating and terrifying. GB47's examination of Maria and the food preparation area was methodical and calculating. His keen eyesight allowed him to observe every detail of the kitchen operations, from the steam rising from soup pots to the movement of kitchen staff as they worked with various food items. His nose, pressed against the glass, was gathering detailed information about the specific food sources available inside the building. Maria's paralysis lasted only seconds before her survival instincts and concern for her colleagues triggered immediate action. Moving slowly and deliberately to avoid startling the bear, she backed away from the window while reaching for the emergency phone that connected directly to the main office. Her hands trembled as she dialed the extension, her eyes never leaving the massive animal that continued to investigate the window and surrounding area. "Principal Chen," Maria whispered urgently when the call was answered. "There is a huge bear outside the cafeteria window. It's right here, looking at me through the glass. It's enormous, bigger than any bear I've ever seen. What should I do?" Principal Chen's response was immediate and decisive. Her training in emergency management and her childhood experience with wildlife encounters provided her with the knowledge needed to give appropriate guidance in this critical situation. "Maria, move away from the windows immediately and gather your staff in the interior storage area." Do not make any sudden movements or loud noises. We have wildlife officers on site who are working to address this situation. As Maria was communicating with Principal Chen, her assistant cook, Rosa Martinez, the wife of custodian Bob Martinez, noticed the commotion and looked toward the windows to see what was causing Maria's distress. Rosa's reaction to seeing the grizzly bear was more vocal than Maria's had been, and her sharp intake of breath and exclamation of surprise caught the attention of the other kitchen staff members. "Dios mío, that's a bear!" Rosa exclaimed, her voice carrying clearly through the kitchen area. The sound of her voice and the movement of multiple people backing away from the windows appeared to capture GB-47's attention more fully, and he began to investigate the glass barrier more actively. The bear's investigation of the window involved standing on his hind legs and placing his massive front paws against the glass while using his sense of smell to gather more detailed information about the food sources inside. His weight against the window created visible stress on the glass, and the sound of his claws scratching against the surface was audible to the kitchen staff, who were now gathered in the interior storage area. Outside the building, Wildlife Officer Jennifer Harrison was conducting her perimeter assessment when she received an urgent radio call from Principal Chen about the bear's presence at the cafeteria windows. Officer Harrison's immediate response was to redirect her attention to the cafeteria area while coordinating with Deputy Anderson to ensure that appropriate backup resources were being summoned. "We have visual contact with the animal at the cafeteria area," Officer Harrison reported to her dispatcher. "Large adult male grizzly, estimated weight 600 to 700 pounds, actively investigating building exterior. Requesting immediate backup from additional wildlife officers and emergency medical services as a precautionary measure." Officer Harrison's assessment of GB-47's behavior at the cafeteria windows indicated that the bear was becoming increasingly focused on gaining access to the building's interior. His investigation of the glass barrier was becoming more persistent, and his body language suggested growing frustration with the obstacle preventing him from reaching the food sources he could see and smell inside. The wildlife officer's training and experience indicated that the situation was approaching a critical decision point. The bear's behavior was escalating from investigation to more assertive attempts to access the building, and the glass barrier that separated him from the interior was not designed to withstand sustained pressure from a large animal. At 11:35, Officer Harrison made the decision to attempt a hazing operation designed to encourage the bear to move away from the building and toward escape routes that would allow him to leave the school property safely. Hazing techniques for grizzly bears involved the use of loud noises, bright lights, and other stimuli that would make the area unpleasant for the animal without causing injury or excessive stress. Officer Harrison's hazing equipment included air horns, rubber bullets for creating loud noises and mild physical discomfort, and flares that produced bright light and sound designed to startle large animals. Her strategy was to position herself at a safe distance from the bear while using these tools to encourage him to move away from the building toward the wooded areas where he could retreat safely. However, as Officer Harrison was preparing to implement her hazing strategy, GB-47's investigation of the cafeteria window reached a critical point. The bear's frustration with the glass barrier and his strong motivation to access the food sources inside had reached levels that triggered more aggressive behavior patterns. At 11:37, GB-47 struck the cafeteria window with his front paw, applying tremendous force to the glass barrier. The impact created a spiderweb pattern of cracks across a significant portion of the window, demonstrating the incredible power that the bear could generate with a single blow. The sound of the impact was audible throughout the cafeteria area and adjacent parts of the building. Inside the kitchen storage area, Maria Gonzalez and her staff heard the sound of breaking glass and realized that their situation had become significantly more dangerous. Maria immediately called the main office again to report the escalation, while her staff members looked for additional safety measures they could implement. "The bear just hit the window and it's starting to break," Maria reported to Principal Chen. "We're in the storage area, but I don't think this door will stop him if he gets inside the building. We need help immediately." Principal Chen's response to this escalation was to activate the school's emergency lockdown procedures at the highest level, sealing all exterior access points and directing all staff to implement barricade procedures in their respective areas. She also requested that law enforcement contact emergency medical services and prepare for possible evacuation procedures if the situation continued to deteriorate. Throughout the building, teachers and staff received emergency notifications through their communication devices, alerting them to the escalation of the wildlife encounter and directing them to implement enhanced safety measures. The notifications were carefully worded to provide necessary information without creating panic among students who were still engaged in indoor learning activities. In Sarah Rodriguez's third-grade classroom, the emergency notification interrupted the reading discussion where Chloe Matthews had been sharing her knowledge about animal behavior with her classmates. Sarah's response was to calmly redirect her students to a learning activity that would keep them engaged while she monitored communications from the administration. "We're going to continue with our indoor activities while some grown-ups take care of a situation outside," Sarah explained to her students in a calm, reassuring voice. "I want everyone to work on their reading journals while I check for any updates from Mrs. Chen Chloe Matthews, with her extensive knowledge of wildlife behavior, recognized that the change in adult behavior patterns suggested something significant was happening. Her experience with animal observation had taught her to pay attention to subtle changes in behavior that might indicate the presence of predators or other environmental changes. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Chloe asked quietly, "is there an animal outside? The way the grown-ups are acting reminds me of how birds act when there's a predator nearby." Sarah Rodriguez was impressed by Chloe's perceptive observation, but wanted to avoid providing information that might create anxiety among her other students. "You're very observant, Chloe. The grown-ups are just being extra careful about something outside, and we're going to stay inside where it's safe while they take care of it." Meanwhile, in the cafeteria area, GB-47's assault on the window was intensifying. His second blow to the glass created additional fractures, and portions of the window were beginning to separate from the frame. The bear's behavior indicated that he was committed to gaining access to the building's interior and was not being deterred by the resistance he was encountering. Officer Harrison's attempt to implement hazing techniques was complicated by the bear's position close to the building and his apparent focus on the specific goal of accessing the cafeteria. Her training indicated that bears in this behavioral state were less likely to respond to hazing techniques and more likely to react aggressively to perceived threats or obstacles to their objectives. At 11:39, GB-47 struck the cafeteria window for the third time, and this blow was sufficient to create a hole large enough for him to begin pushing through the glass barrier. The sound of breaking glass and the bear's vocalizations as he worked to enlarge the opening carried throughout the cafeteria area and into adjacent parts of the building. The breach of the building's perimeter represented a fundamental change in the nature of the emergency situation. Wildlife officers and law enforcement personnel were now dealing with a large predator that had gained access to a building containing nearly 400 students and staff members, creating unprecedented challenges for emergency response procedures. Officer Harrison immediately radioed for additional emergency resources while repositioning herself to maintain visual contact with the bear's location. Her assessment was that the situation had escalated beyond the capabilities of hazing techniques and might require more aggressive intervention methods to protect human life and safety. Grizzly bear has breached building perimeter at cafeteria area, Officer Harrison reported to her dispatcher. Animal is inside elementary school building with approximately 400 students and staff, requesting immediate response from all available wildlife officers, law enforcement, and emergency medical services. Inside the building, Principal Chen received reports of the window breach and immediately activated evacuation procedures for areas of the building that could be safely accessed without encountering the bear. Her emergency management training indicated that the priority was creating maximum distance between students and the animal while maintaining controlled conditions that would prevent panic and chaos. The school's public address system carried Principal Chen's carefully measured voice to every classroom and common area. Teachers and staff, we are implementing emergency evacuation procedures for specific areas of the building. Please await individual instructions for your area and maintain calm, quiet conditions with your students. The evacuation process was complicated by the need to avoid areas where the bear might be encountered while ensuring that students and staff could reach safe locations outside the building. Principal Chen was coordinating with law enforcement and wildlife officers to identify safe routes and assembly areas that would allow for controlled evacuation without exposing people to additional danger. In the cafeteria area, GB-47 had successfully enlarged the opening in the window sufficiently to allow his massive frame to enter the building. The bear's entry into the kitchen area was methodical and purposeful, demonstrating his familiarity with investigating new environments while remaining alert for potential threats or obstacles. The kitchen area provided GB-47 with immediate access to the food sources that had attracted him to the building. His investigation of the prep areas, storage containers, and cooking equipment was systematic and efficient, as he located and consumed various food items while continuing to monitor his environment for changes that might require defensive or escape responses. Maria Gonzalez and her kitchen staff remained in the storage area, listening to the sounds of the bear's movement through their workspace while maintaining communication with the main office. The storage area door was substantial but not designed to prevent entry by a determined large animal, making their position precarious if the bear discovered their presence. The bear's feeding behavior in the kitchen demonstrated his success in locating the food sources that had motivated his approach to the school property. His consumption of available food items provided positive reinforcement for his presence in the building and increased the likelihood that he would continue to investigate other areas where additional food sources might be located. Officer Harrison's assessment of the bear's behavior inside the building indicated that his focus on feeding activities might provide opportunities for encouraging him to exit the building voluntarily. Her strategy involved positioning herself where she could observe the bear's movements while preparing to guide him toward available exit points if appropriate opportunities arose. However, the bear's presence inside the building created complex challenges for wildlife management techniques. Traditional approaches to bear management assumed outdoor environments where animals had multiple escape routes and could retreat to familiar territories. The confined spaces and multiple potential hiding places within the school building created unprecedented complications for standard wildlife control procedures. At 11:45, as GB-47 continued his investigation of the kitchen area, the sound of his movement and feeding activities was beginning to carry through the building's ventilation system and structural elements. Students and staff in adjacent areas could hear unfamiliar noises that suggested large-scale activity in the cafeteria, creating anxiety and curiosity about the nature of the emergency situation. In Jennifer Kowalski's combined second and third grade classroom, 8-year-old Marcus Johnson was among the first students to recognize that the sounds they were hearing were not consistent with normal building operations or typical emergency procedures. His experience living in urban environments had taught him to pay attention to unusual sounds that might indicate potentially dangerous situations. "Mrs. Kowalski," Marcus whispered, approaching his teacher's desk where she was monitoring communications from the administration. "Those sounds from the cafeteria don't sound like people. It sounds like a really big animal moving around and knocking things over." Jennifer Kowalski was struck by Marcus's perceptive observation, as she had been having similar thoughts about the nature of the sounds they were hearing. Her teacher training included instruction in maintaining calm during emergency situations, but she was beginning to suspect that they were dealing with something significantly more serious than typical school emergency scenarios. "You're right that those are unusual sounds, Marcus," Jennifer replied quietly. "The important thing is that we stay calm and quiet while the grown-ups handle whatever is happening. Can you help me make sure all our classmates are staying focused on their activities?" Marcus nodded seriously and returned to his desk, but his awareness of potential danger was evident in his body language and the way he continued to monitor sounds from other parts of the building. His ability to recognize that they were dealing with an animal rather than a human-related emergency demonstrated the sophisticated observational skills that some children develop in response to environmental awareness. Throughout the building, similar conversations were taking place as students and staff tried to understand the nature of the emergency situation while following established safety procedures. The unfamiliar sounds and the extended duration of the lockdown procedures were creating anxiety among some students, requiring additional attention from teachers to maintain calm, productive conditions. At 11:50, GB-47 completed his investigation of the kitchen area and began to explore other parts of the building that were accessible from the cafeteria. His movement into the dining area of the cafeteria brought him closer to the main corridors that connected to classroom areas where students and staff were implementing emergency procedures. The Bears' investigation of the dining area was thorough and methodical, involving examination of food service equipment, storage areas, and the various scents and sounds that provided information about human activities in other parts of the building. His keen senses allowed him to detect the presence of large numbers of people in nearby areas, though the physical barriers of walls and doors prevented direct visual contact. Officer Harrison's observation of the Bears' movement into the dining area indicated that his investigation was expanding beyond the immediate food sources that had initially attracted him to the building. Her assessment was that the bear's behavior was transitioning from focused feeding to broader territorial investigation, potentially bringing him into contact with areas where students and staff were present. The wildlife officer's communication with law enforcement and emergency coordination personnel emphasized the urgency of completing evacuation procedures for areas of the building that could be safely accessed. Her expertise in bear behavior indicated that the animal's expanding investigation pattern increased the likelihood of human encounters that could result in serious injuries or fatalities. "Bear has moved from kitchen area into main cafeteria dining area," Officer Harrison reported. "Animal appears to be conducting territorial investigation beyond initial feeding behavior. Recommend expediting evacuation procedures for all areas that can be safely accessed without encountering the animal." Principal Chen's coordination of evacuation procedures was complicated by the need to maintain visual monitoring of the bear's location while ensuring that evacuation routes did not create opportunities for direct encounters. The school's floor plan included multiple exits and corridor systems, but the bear's position in the central cafeteria area limited access to some of these routes. The evacuation process began with areas of the building that were most distant from the cafeteria and had direct access to exterior exits. Kindergarten and first-grade classrooms located in the building's west wing were among the first to be evacuated, with teachers leading small groups of students through carefully planned routes to assembly areas in the parking lot. Amanda Clark's kindergarten class was among the first groups to be evacuated, with her 18 students forming quiet lines and following established emergency procedures as they moved from their classroom to the designated assembly area. The 5- and 6-year-old students followed their teachers' instructions with remarkable discipline, demonstrating the effectiveness of regular emergency drills in preparing young children for crisis situations. "We're going to walk quietly to our special outside place," Amanda explained to her students as they prepared to leave their classroom. "Remember to stay in line, listen for instructions, and stay close to me. We're practicing being very good listeners and followers." The evacuation of younger students was particularly challenging because of their limited understanding of emergency situations and their natural tendency to ask questions about unusual circumstances. Teachers worked to maintain calm, reassuring attitudes while providing enough information to ensure cooperation without creating anxiety or fear. Emma Thompson, the 5-year-old daughter of administrative assistant Linda Thompson, was among the kindergarten students being evacuated. Her familiarity with the school building and many staff members helped her serve as an informal leader among her classmates, providing reassurance and modeling appropriate behavior during the evacuation process. As the evacuation of the West Wing progressed, GB-47's investigation of the cafeteria area was expanding to include examination of the service corridors and storage areas that connected the food service facilities to other parts of the building. His movement through these areas brought him closer to the main hallway system that provided access to classroom areas where students and staff were still implementing lockdown procedures. The bear's exploration of the service corridors demonstrated his familiarity with investigating complex environments and his ability to navigate unfamiliar spaces while maintaining awareness of potential escape routes. His movement patterns indicated sophisticated spatial reasoning and memory capabilities that allowed him to track his location within the building while continuing to search for additional food sources. At 12 o'clock, the scheduled lunch period for older elementary students was supposed to begin, but the bear's presence in the cafeteria area had completely disrupted normal school operations. Students who would normally have been moving through the hallways toward the dining area were instead maintaining lockdown positions in their classrooms, while evacuation procedures continued for areas that could be safely accessed. In Michael Thompson's 6th grade classroom, students were becoming increasingly aware that they were dealing with an emergency situation that was more serious than typical school safety drills. The duration of the lockdown procedures and the sounds they were hearing from other parts of the building suggested circumstances that were outside their previous experience with school emergency situations. 12-year-old Sarah Martinez, a student known for her leadership abilities and mature understanding of complex situations, approached her teacher with questions about the nature of the emergency they were experiencing. Her observation skills had led her to conclude that they were dealing with something more serious than fire drills or severe weather procedures. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah asked quietly, "is there really an animal in our school? The way the teachers are acting and the sounds we're hearing suggest that we're dealing with wildlife rather than other types of emergencies." Michael Thompson was impressed by Sarah's analytical thinking and mature approach to the situation, but he wanted to provide reassurance while acknowledging her perceptive observations. His experience working with 6th grade students had taught him that pre-adolescents often had sophisticated abilities to assess situations and required honest communication that respected their intelligence. "You're very observant, Sarah," Michael replied. The adults are handling a situation involving wildlife, and our job is to follow safety procedures while they take care of it. The important thing is that we stay calm and help our classmates do the same." Sarah nodded thoughtfully and returned to her desk, but her awareness of the seriousness of the situation was evident in her continued attention to sounds from other parts of the building and her quiet conversations with classmates about following safety procedures carefully. As the noon hour approached, GB-47's investigation of the building was bringing him closer to areas where students and staff were present. His exploration of the service corridors had led him to discover access points to the main hallway system, creating opportunities for encounters with people who were still in the building, awaiting evacuation. The bear's movement into the main hallway area represented a significant escalation in the potential danger to students and staff who remained in the building. The hallway system provided access to all classroom areas, administrative offices and other spaces where people were present, creating numerous possibilities for direct encounters between humans and the massive predator. Officer Harrison's monitoring of the bear's location through radio communications with school personnel indicated that the animal was expanding his territorial investigation beyond the food-focused behavior that had characterized his initial entry into the building. Her assessment was that the bear's behavior was becoming more exploratory and potentially more dangerous as he encountered new areas and stimuli within the school environment. "Bear has accessed main hallway system," Officer Harrison reported to emergency coordination personnel. "Animal's behavior is transitioning from feeding-focused to territorial investigation. Immediate evacuation of all remaining personnel is critical to preventing human casualties." The complexity of coordinating evacuation procedures while monitoring a large predator's movements within the building required unprecedented cooperation between wildlife officers, law enforcement personnel, school administrators, and emergency medical services. The situation was unlike any emergency scenario for which standard procedures had been developed. Principal Chen's coordination efforts were focused on maintaining communication between various areas of the building while ensuring that evacuation procedures could continue safely. Her emergency management training provided her with frameworks for decision-making under crisis conditions. But the specific circumstances of a grizzly bear loose in an elementary school required adaptive problem-solving beyond established protocols. At 12:05, reports from staff members in different areas of the building indicated that GB-47 was moving through the main hallway system in a methodical pattern that suggested he was investigating all accessible areas of the building. His movement was bringing him progressively closer to classroom areas where students and staff were still present. The bear's investigation of the hallway areas included examination of doorways, ventilation systems, and other architectural features that provided information about the spaces beyond. His keen senses allowed him to detect the presence of people in areas that were not directly visible, creating awareness of potential food sources or threats in adjacent spaces. In Dr. Patricia Williams's counseling office, the school counselor was maintaining communication with the main office while preparing to implement evacuation procedures if her area was cleared for safe exit. Her training in crisis intervention provided her with skills for maintaining calm under stressful conditions, but the current situation was testing those abilities in unprecedented ways. Dr. Williams' office was located in a section of the building that had not yet been cleared for evacuation due to its proximity to the hallway areas where the bear was conducting his investigation. Her position required her to maintain readiness for rapid evacuation while staying alert for changes in the animal's location that might affect her safety. The sound of the bear's movement through the hallway areas was becoming more distinct and closer to Dr. Williams' office. She could hear the scratching of claws on the floor surfaces, the sound of the animal's breathing, and occasional vocalizations that indicated his continued investigation of the building's interior spaces. At 12:10, GB-47's exploration of the hallway system brought him to the area immediately outside Dr. Williams' counseling office. The bear's investigation of this area was thorough and persistent, involving examination of the doorway, surrounding walls, and the scents that indicated human presence in the adjacent space. Dr. Williams could hear the bear's investigation of her office area through the door and walls that separated her from the animal. The proximity of the massive predator created an immediate sense of vulnerability and danger that tested all of her professional training in maintaining calm under crisis conditions. The bear's behavior outside the counseling office included standing on his hind legs to investigate the upper portions of the doorway and walls, creating sounds that clearly indicated his size and physical capabilities. His vocalizations during this investigation suggested interest in the space and potential awareness of human presence inside. Dr. Williams' response to the bear's presence outside her office was to move to the area of the room that was furthest from the door, while maintaining communication with the main office through her emergency phone system. Her position allowed her to monitor the animal's activities while preparing for various potential scenarios. "The bear is right outside my office, Doctor," Williams reported quietly to Principal Chen. "I can hear it investigating the door and walls. It seems very interested in this area. I'm in the back corner of my office and ready to follow whatever instructions you have." Principal Chen's response to Dr. Williams' report was to coordinate with Officer Harrison about the bear's specific location and behavior, while preparing emergency response procedures that might be needed if the animal gained access to occupied areas of the building. The wildlife officer's assessment of the bear's behavior outside the counseling office indicated that his investigation was becoming more focused and persistent in areas where he detected human presence. Her expertise in bear behavior suggested that the animal's awareness of people in adjacent spaces was increasing his interest in gaining access to those areas. At 12:15, GB-47's investigation of the counseling office area escalated to physical testing of the door and surrounding structure. The bear used his claws and considerable strength to examine the doorframe, creating sounds that indicated he was applying significant force to potential access points. The sound of the bear's assault on the counseling office door was audible throughout adjacent areas of the building, creating awareness among students and staff that the animal was attempting to gain access to occupied spaces. The escalation represented a fundamental change in the nature of the emergency, from investigation to active attempts at human contact. Dr. Williams could feel the vibrations of the bear's efforts to access her office through the floor and walls of the building. The intensity of the animal's investigation was creating structural stress that was evident in the movement of the door and surrounding framework. Officer Harrison's monitoring of the situation indicated that the bear's behavior was escalating toward levels that represented immediate danger to human life and safety. Her assessment was that intervention techniques would be necessary to prevent the animal from gaining access to occupied areas of the building. "Bear is actively attempting to breach counseling office door with human occupant inside," Officer Harrison reported. "Animal's behavior indicates immediate threat to human safety, requesting authorization for lethal force intervention to prevent casualties." The decision to use lethal force against GB-47 represented the most serious escalation of the emergency response procedures. Wildlife management protocols emphasized non-lethal solutions whenever possible, but the immediate threat to human life and safety had created circumstances that required consideration of all available options. Principal Chen's communication with emergency coordination personnel included detailed reports about the bear's location, behavior, and the immediate threat to Dr. Williams' safety. The decision-making process required rapid assessment of available options while considering the safety of all students and staff still present in the building. At 12:20, GB-47's assault on the counselling office door was successful in creating an opening large enough for him to see into the interior space where Dr. Williams was positioned. The bear's visual contact with the human occupant created a direct predator-prey encounter that represented the most dangerous aspect of the entire emergency situation. Dr. Williams found herself making direct eye contact with the massive grizzly bear as he peered through the opening he had created in her office door. The encounter was profoundly shocking and terrifying, creating an immediate adrenaline response that triggered fight-or-flight instincts while her rational mind tried to process the surreal nature of the situation. The bear's examination of Dr. Williams through the damaged doorway was methodical and calculating, demonstrating the intelligence and assessment capabilities that characterized large predators evaluating potential prey or threats. His dark eyes remained focused on her while he gathered information about her size, position, and potential responses to his presence. Dr. Williams's training in crisis intervention included techniques for remaining calm under extreme stress, but the direct encounter with a massive predator tested those abilities beyond their intended limits. Her response was to remain as still as possible, while maintaining soft eye contact that avoided challenging the animal's dominance. Officer Harrison's observation of the bear's breach of the counselling office created immediate urgency for intervention procedures. Her position outside the building provided limited visibility of the specific encounter between the bear and Dr. Williams, but radio communications indicated that immediate action was necessary to prevent serious injury or death. The wildlife officer's expertise in bear behavior indicated that the animal's successful breach of human barriers and direct contact with a potential prey individual represented a critical escalation that required immediate response. Her assessment was that the bear's behavior had reached levels that posed immediate lethal threat to the human occupant. Bear has breached counselling office and has visual contact with human occupant, Officer Harrison reported. Immediate intervention required to prevent casualties. Requesting backup and medical emergency response. The coordination of emergency response procedures at this critical moment required split-second decision-making and precise execution of intervention techniques that had never been tested in elementary school environments. The unique circumstances of the situation demanded adaptive problem-solving that went beyond established protocols. At 12:25, GB-47 made the decision to enlarge the opening in the counselling office door sufficiently to allow his entry into the space where Dr. Williams was positioned. The bear's commitment to accessing the occupied space represented the most dangerous escalation of the entire emergency situation. The sound of the bear's assault on the door structure was tremendous, involving the full force of his 700-pound frame and powerful claws as he worked to gain complete access to the office interior. The structural damage was extensive and created vibrations that were felt throughout adjacent areas of the building. Dr. Williams realized that her position in the office was becoming untenable and that she needed to take immediate action to protect herself from the approaching predator. Her options were extremely limited by the confined space and the bear's position between her and potential escape routes. The school counsellor's decision was to attempt to reach the office's emergency exit, a small window that provided access to an exterior courtyard area. Her movement toward the window was careful and deliberate, designed to avoid sudden actions that might trigger aggressive responses from the bear. GB-47's reaction to Dr. William's movement was immediate and intense. The bear's predatory instincts were triggered by the prey animal's attempt to escape, creating a pursuit response that demonstrated the explosive speed and agility that made grizzly bears such effective predators. The bear's pursuit of Doctor. Williams across the small office space occurred with shocking speed and violence. His massive frame moved with surprising agility as he closed the distance between himself and the fleeing human, demonstrating the athletic capabilities that allowed grizzly bears to successfully hunt much larger prey animals in their natural environments. Dr. Williams reached the emergency exit window just as GB-47's pursuit brought him within striking distance. Her attempt to open the window and escape to the exterior courtyard was hampered by emergency locking mechanisms that required additional time to operate properly. The bear's initial contact with Dr. Williams occurred as she was struggling with the window mechanism. His massive paw struck her back and shoulder area with tremendous force, knocking her away from the window and onto the office floor. The impact of the blow was sufficient to cause immediate injuries and disorientation. Dr. Williams' injuries from the bear's initial strike included multiple lacerations from his claws, potential fractures in her shoulder and ribs, and the psychological trauma of direct physical contact with a large predator. Her training in crisis management had not prepared her for the physical and emotional reality of a predator attack. GB-47's behavior following his initial strike on Dr. Williams was consistent with typical grizzly bear predatory patterns. The animal positioned himself over his victim while using his nose and mouth to investigate her condition and assess whether she represented a continuing threat or potential food source. The bear's investigation of Dr. Williams involved physical manipulation that caused additional injuries and trauma. His powerful jaws and claws were designed for processing large prey animals, and their application to human anatomy resulted in severe lacerations and tissue damage. Outside the building, Officer Harrison's monitoring of the situation through radio communications and observation indicated that the encounter between the bear and Dr. Williams had escalated to active predation. Her assessment was that immediate intervention was necessary to prevent the human casualty from becoming a fatality. The wildlife officer's decision to intervene directly in the predation event required her to enter the building and approach the bear while he was actively engaged with his victim. This action represented extreme danger to Officer Harrison herself, while providing the only realistic chance of saving Dr. Williams's life. Officer Harrison's entry into the building was conducted with maximum caution and preparation, including tranquilizer equipment, protective gear, and communication with backup personnel who were en route to provide additional support. Her approach to the counseling office area required navigation through the same hallway system that the bear had used during his exploration of the building. At 12:30, Officer Harrison reached the damage counseling office where GB-47 was continuing his attack on Dr. Williams. The wildlife officer's assessment of the situation indicated that the victim was still alive but suffering from severe injuries that would require immediate medical attention if she was to survive the encounter. The officer's intervention strategy involved the use of tranquilizer equipment to sedate the bear while minimizing additional trauma to the victim. However, the confined space of the office and the bear's position over Dr. Williams created significant challenges for accurate tranquilizer placement without risking additional harm to the human victim. Officer Harrison's first tranquilizer shot struck GB-47 in the shoulder area, delivering a dose of sedative that was calculated to render the animal unconscious within several minutes. However, the bear's immediate reaction to the tranquilizer impact was to become more agitated and aggressive rather than showing immediate signs of sedation. The wounded and increasingly agitated bear's response to the tranquilizer dart included vocalizations and movements that indicated pain and anger rather than the calming effects that the sedative was intended to produce. His behavior toward Dr. Williams became more violent as his stress and discomfort increased. Officer Harrison's assessment of the bear's reaction to the first tranquilizer dose indicated that additional intervention would be necessary to stop the attack and save the victim's life. Her decision was to use a second tranquilizer dart while positioning herself to provide physical intervention if the chemical sedation proved insufficient. The second tranquilizer dart struck GB-47 in the hindquarter area, delivering an additional dose of sedative that would combine with the first injection to produce stronger effects. However, the time required for the chemicals to take effect would be several minutes, during which the bear could continue his attack on Dr. Williams. Officer Harrison's decision to provide immediate physical intervention involved approaching the bear with protective equipment while he was still conscious and actively engaged in predatory behavior. This action represented extreme personal risk while providing the only realistic chance of saving the victim from fatal injuries. The wildlife officer's physical intervention included the use of a protective shield and deterrent spray designed to force the bear away from his victim without causing unnecessary harm to the animal. Her approach required precise timing and positioning to be effective while minimizing additional danger to all parties involved. GB-47's reaction to Officer Harrison's physical intervention was to redirect his attention from Dr. Williams to the new threat represented by the approaching human. The bear's predatory focus shifted to the officer, creating an opportunity for the victim to receive medical attention while placing the rescuer in immediate danger. The bear's confrontation with Officer Harrison demonstrated the full extent of his size, strength, and predatory capabilities. His aggressive display included standing on his hind legs to his full height of nearly 8 feet, while vocalizing and positioning himself for potential attack on the second human target. Officer Harrison's training in wildlife encounters had prepared her for direct confrontations with large predators, but the confined space of the office and the bear's agitated state created circumstances that tested her skills and equipment beyond their normal limits. Her response was to maintain defensive positioning while monitoring the bear for signs that the tranquilizer drugs were beginning to take effect. At 12:35, the combined effects of both tranquilizer doses were beginning to affect GB-47's behavior and physical capabilities. The bear's movements were becoming less coordinated, and his aggressive displays were showing signs of the sedation that would eventually render him unconscious. However, the time required for complete sedation provided opportunities for additional dangerous encounters as the bear's behavior became less predictable under the influence of the tranquilizer drugs. His movements were erratic and potentially more dangerous as his normal behavioral patterns were disrupted by the chemical effects. Dr. Williams's condition during this period was critical, with severe injuries requiring immediate medical attention to prevent fatal blood loss and shock. Her consciousness was intermittent, and her vital signs indicated trauma consistent with major predator attack, including multiple lacerations, potential internal injuries, and severe psychological shock. Emergency medical personnel who had been standing by outside the building were now able to approach the counseling office area as the bear's sedation reached levels that allowed human intervention. However, the confined space and ongoing presence of the partially sedated predator created significant challenges for medical evacuation procedures. The emergency medical team's assessment of Dr. Williams' injuries indicated multiple life-threatening conditions requiring immediate trauma intervention and rapid transport to advanced medical facilities. Her injuries included deep lacerations on her back and shoulders, potential spinal trauma from the initial impact, and significant blood loss that was approaching critical levels. Officer Harrison's monitoring of GB-47 sedation progress indicated that the bear was approaching unconsciousness, but was still capable of movement and potential aggression. Her assessment was that medical personnel could begin working with the victim while maintaining constant vigilance for any signs of renewed activity from the predator. The medical evacuation of Dr. Williams from the counseling office required careful coordination between emergency medical personnel, wildlife officers, and law enforcement to ensure that all parties could safely access the confined space where the attack had occurred. The procedures were complicated by the ongoing presence of the massive, partially sedated bear. At 12:40, GB-47 finally reached full unconsciousness from the combined effects of both tranquilizer doses. The bear's massive frame collapsed in the counseling office, finally allowing unrestricted access for medical personnel to provide emergency treatment to Dr. Williams and prepare her for transport to trauma facilities. The medical team's initial treatment of Dr. Williams focused on controlling bleeding, stabilizing her vital signs, and preparing her for rapid transport to Sacred Heart Medical Center, where trauma surgeons were standing by to provide advanced medical intervention. Her condition was critical, but potentially survivable with immediate professional medical care. The evacuation of Dr. Williams from the counseling office required specialized equipment to safely move a trauma victim through the damaged doorway and hallway system to reach emergency transport vehicles outside the building. The process was conducted with maximum speed while maintaining proper medical protocols for spinal injury protection. Officer Harrison's assessment of the unconscious bear indicated that GB-47 would remain sedated for several hours, providing time for wildlife authorities to coordinate his removal from the school building and transport to appropriate facilities for evaluation and disposition. The bear's future would depend on various factors, including his behavior patterns and the extent of human injuries he had caused. As Dr. Williams was being transported to medical facilities, Principal Chen was coordinating the continuation of evacuation procedures for students and staff who remained in areas of the building that could now be safely accessed. The bear's unconscious state allowed for completion of emergency procedures that had been interrupted by his active presence. The evacuation of remaining students and staff from Redwood Elementary required careful coordination to ensure that all areas of the building were thoroughly searched and that no individuals were left behind. The process was complicated by the traumatic nature of the situation and the need to provide psychological support for children who had been exposed to the emergency. Students who had been evacuated earlier were maintained in assembly areas outside the building where teachers and counselors worked to provide reassurance and age-appropriate explanations of the situation. The goal was to help children process their experiences while preventing the development of long-term psychological trauma. 8-year-old Chloe Matthews was among the students who had been evacuated from Sarah Rodriguez's third-grade classroom. Her extensive knowledge of wildlife behavior helped her understand what had happened better than many of her classmates. But the reality of a predator attack in her school environment was still profoundly shocking and disturbing. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Chloe asked as they waited in the assembly area, "was that a grizzly bear that came into our school? I've read about them, but I never thought one would actually come into a building where people were." Sarah Rodriguez recognized that Chloe's scientific curiosity and advanced understanding of wildlife behavior required honest, factual responses that respected her intelligence while providing appropriate emotional support. Her approach was to acknowledge the reality of what had occurred while emphasizing the rarity of such events and the safety measures that had protected students. Yes, Chloe, it was a grizzly bear, Sarah replied. It's very unusual for bears to come into buildings, and it happened because the bear was looking for food and didn't understand that schools are places where people work and learn. The important thing is that the grown-ups were prepared to keep everyone safe. Chloe nodded thoughtfully, processing this information through her understanding of animal behavior and her own observations of the morning's events. Her response demonstrated the resilience and adaptability that characterized many children when provided with honest information and appropriate support. I think the bear was probably hungry after hibernation and could smell food from the cafeteria, Chloe observed. In my nature books, it says that bears will travel long distances to find food, especially in the spring when they're building up their strength. It's sad that, Doctor. Williams got hurt, but at least the wildlife officer knew how to help both her and the bear. Chloe's sophisticated understanding of the situation was remarkable for her age and demonstrated the value of environmental education in helping children understand and cope with wildlife encounters. Her response would prove to be helpful in counseling sessions designed to help students process their experiences. Throughout the assembly areas, teachers and counselors were working with students who were displaying various emotional responses to the traumatic situation they had experienced. Some children were asking detailed questions about what had happened, while others were showing signs of anxiety or fear that would require ongoing support and intervention. Marcus Johnson, the confident third grader who had been among the first to recognize that the sounds in the building indicated animal presence, was serving as an informal leader among his classmates in helping them understand and cope with the situation. His natural leadership abilities and mature understanding made him effective in providing peer support during the crisis. The most important thing to remember is that the grown-ups kept us safe, Marcus explained to a group of younger students who were gathered around him in the assembly area. Even when something really scary happened, our teachers and the police officers and the animal experts knew what to do to protect us. The emergency response to the situation at Redwood Elementary had involved coordination between multiple agencies, including the Spokane County Sheriff's Department, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Spokane Fire Department Emergency Medical Services, and various other support organizations. The complexity of managing a wildlife emergency in a school environment had required unprecedented cooperation and communication. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the immediate emergency situation had been resolved, with the bear sedated and removed from the building, all students and staff safely evacuated, and Dr. Williams receiving advanced medical treatment at Sacred Heart Medical Center. However, the long-term implications of the incident were just beginning to unfold. The investigation into how GB-47 had come to be in the vicinity of Redwood Elementary would involve detailed analysis of wildlife movement patterns, environmental factors that might have influenced the bear's behavior, and human activities that might have attracted large predators to populated areas. Wildlife biologists would spend months studying the incident to develop improved prevention and response strategies. The medical treatment of Dr. Williams would require multiple surgeries to repair the damage caused by the bear's claws and teeth, followed by extensive rehabilitation to address both physical and psychological trauma. Her recovery would become a symbol of both the vulnerability of humans to wildlife encounters and the resilience of individuals facing life-threatening situations. The psychological impact of the incident on students, staff, and families at Redwood Elementary would require ongoing counseling and support services to help the school community process their experiences and develop healthy coping strategies. Mental health professionals specializing in childhood trauma would work with the school for months to address the various ways that different individuals had been affected. The investigation by wildlife authorities would reveal that GB47 had been traveling through the area for several days before the incident, following natural corridors that connected wilderness areas with suburban developments. His presence in the vicinity of the school had been the result of habitat pressures, food scarcity in his normal territory, and the attractive scents emanating from human food sources. The bear's fate would ultimately be determined by wildlife management policies that balanced public safety concerns with conservation principles. His age, size, and the fact that he had injured a human being would influence decisions about whether he could be relocated to remote wilderness areas or whether more drastic measures would be necessary. The broader implications of the Redwood Elementary incident would influence wildlife management policies throughout the Pacific Northwest, leading to improved monitoring systems for large predator movements, enhanced coordination between wildlife agencies and school districts, and development of specialized emergency response protocols for wildlife encounters in populated areas. The story of what happened at Redwood Elementary on May 27, 2025, would become a case study in emergency management, wildlife behavior, and community resilience. The incident demonstrated both the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters in areas where human development intersected with natural habitats and the importance of preparation, training, and coordinated response in protecting human life and safety. For the students who experienced the emergency at Redwood Elementary, the incident would become a defining memory that would influence their understanding of wildlife, their relationship with natural environments, and their appreciation for the professionals who work to protect public safety. The educational value of their experience, properly processed with appropriate counseling and support, would contribute to their development as environmentally aware and resilient individuals. The physical recovery of Dr. Williams would take many months and would involve multiple medical specialists working to repair the extensive damage caused by her encounter with GB47. Her psychological recovery would require even longer, with trauma counselors helping her process the profound impact of surviving a predator attack and returning to normal life activities. The investigation into the incident would ultimately reveal that several factors had contributed to creating the circumstances that led to GB47's presence at the school. Drought conditions in remote wilderness areas had reduced natural food sources. Human activities had created attractive scents that drew wildlife toward populated areas, and habitat fragmentation had forced large animals to travel through developed regions in search of suitable territory. The response of the Redwood Elementary School community to the crisis would become a model for how educational institutions could support students and families through traumatic events. The combination of immediate crisis response, ongoing counseling services, and community support would help ensure that the long-term impact of the incident would include personal growth and increased resilience rather than lasting psychological damage. The changes in wildlife management policies that resulted from the Redwood Elementary incident would include improved monitoring of large predator movements, enhanced communication systems between wildlife agencies and local institutions, and development of specialized response protocols for wildlife emergencies in populated areas. These improvements would help prevent similar incidents and improve response capabilities if such situations occurred in the future. The story of GB47 and his encounter with the Redwood Elementary community would be remembered as a reminder of the complex relationship between human communities and wildlife populations, the importance of respecting and understanding natural behaviors, and the ongoing challenges of coexistence in areas where developed and natural environments intersected. The lessons learned from the incident would influence educational programs designed to help children understand wildlife behavior and safety procedures, emergency response training for school personnel, and community planning processes that considered wildlife movement patterns in the development of safety protocols. The ultimate resolution of the situation would involve the successful recovery of Dr. Williams, the appropriate disposition of GB47 according to wildlife management principles, and the development of improved systems for preventing and responding to similar incidents in the future. The incident would serve as a turning point in understanding and preparing for wildlife encounters in educational environments. The legacy of the Redwood Elementary incident would include enhanced safety protocols, improved understanding of wildlife behavior in populated areas, and a model for community resilience in the face of unprecedented challenges. The experience would contribute to the ongoing development of strategies for protecting both human communities and wildlife populations in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. The next stories. When the Wild Strikes Back. The morning of July 18th, 2024, started like any other for Officer Mark Reynolds of the Fairbanks Police Department. At 6:47 a.m., the 42-year-old veteran of 17 years stood outside the main station on Cushman Street, steam rising from his coffee cup in the crisp Alaskan air. The temperature hovered at 52 degrees, unusual for mid-July, but not uncommon in the interior. Mark had always appreciated these quiet moments before the day's chaos began, watching the sparse early morning traffic navigate the wide streets of Alaska's second-largest city. Mark Stephen Reynolds had been born and raised in Fairbanks, the son of a pipeline worker and a school teacher. His father, Robert Reynolds, had come north in 1975 during the construction boom, met his mother Sarah at a community dance, and never left. Mark inherited his father's broad shoulders and steady demeanor, along with his mother's sharp intellect and unwavering moral compass. At 6'2", with graying temples and weathered hands, he commanded respect without demanding it. His wife, Jennifer, often joked that he looked more like a park ranger than a city cop, with his preference for hiking boots over dress shoes and his encyclopedic knowledge of local wildlife. The Fairbanks police station sat on a tree-lined section of Cushman Street, surrounded by a mix of government buildings and residential areas. Behind the station, a network of hiking trails connected to the larger Chaina River Recreation Area, making it one of the more scenic law enforcement facilities in Alaska. The building itself, constructed in 1987, was a modest two-story structure of brick and glass, designed to blend with the natural surroundings rather than impose upon them. Mark's patrol partner, Officer Lisa Chen, emerged from the station at exactly 7 a.m., her regulation boots clicking against the concrete steps. Lisa, 29 years old, had transferred from Anchorage 3 years earlier, drawn by Fairbanks' reputation for community policing and outdoor recreation. A former competitive swimmer with short black hair and alert brown eyes, she brought urban experience to complement Mark's local knowledge. Their partnership had been one of the department's most effective, combining his instinctive understanding of the community with her methodical approach to police work. "Morning, Mark," Lisa called, adjusting her duty belt as she approached their patrol car. "Dispatch says it's going to be a quiet one. Only 2 calls overnight, a noise complaint on College Road and a minor fender bender near the university." Mark nodded, taking a final sip of his coffee. "Good. Jennifer's got her book club tonight, so I was hoping to get home early, maybe take the dogs for a run on the Chaina Lakes Trail." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant David Kowalski, a 20-year veteran who served as their shift supervisor. Dave, 51 years old with a salt and pepper mustache and the slightly rounded physique of someone who'd spent too many years behind a desk, parked his SUV and walked over with a folder in his hand. "Reynolds, Chen," he greeted them. "Got an update on that bear situation out in the Goldstream Valley. Fish and Game wants us to increase patrols in the residential areas backing up to the wilderness. Seems a large grizzly has been spotted multiple times this week, getting closer to populated areas. Mark's expression grew serious. Alaska Department of Fish and Game biologist Dr. Amanda Foster had briefed the department just 3 days earlier about increased bear activity throughout the region. A late spring had delayed salmon runs, forcing bears to forage closer to human settlements. Dr. Foster, a wildlife biology PhD from the University of Alaska with 15 years of field experience, had emphasized that food-stressed bears were unpredictable and potentially dangerous. "Any specific areas of concern?" Lisa asked, reviewing the folder Dave handed her. "The usual hotspots," Dave replied. "Goldstream Road, Old Stees Highway, and the neighborhoods backing up to the Chena River Recreation Area. But here's the thing. This particular bear is estimated at over 700 pounds. That's a big male, probably dominant in his territory. Dr. Foster thinks he might be an older bear, possibly displaced by a younger male. Mark had encountered bears during his career, but always in rural areas or obvious wilderness settings. The idea of a massive grizzly venturing into the city limits was unsettling, though not unprecedented. Fairbanks, with its population of just over 32,000, existed in a delicate balance with the surrounding wilderness. The city's edges blended seamlessly into boreal forest, creating numerous opportunities for wildlife encounters. As they discussed patrol routes, none of them noticed the massive shape moving through the tree line approximately 400 yards behind the police station. The grizzly, a male weighing an estimated 780 pounds, had been following the scent trails along the Chena River for most of the night. Food had been scarce this season, and the bear's usual foraging grounds had been disrupted by unusually heavy rainfall that had washed out much of the berry crop. The bear, later designated as bear number 47 by fish and game officials, was approximately 12 years old and had never had a negative encounter with humans. Dr. Foster's subsequent analysis would reveal that this bear had likely been attracted to the area by the scent of food waste from nearby restaurants and the residual odors from the station's break room, which was located on the ground floor of the building. At 7:15 a.m., Mark and Lisa began their patrol, driving slowly through the residential neighborhoods east of the station. Their route took them past the comfortable homes of University West, where professors and state employees lived in modest houses surrounded by birch and spruce trees. Many of these properties backed directly onto undeveloped land, creating a natural corridor for wildlife movement. Their first stop was at the home of Dr. Robert Martinez, a geology professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, who had called in a bear sighting 2 days earlier. Dr. Martinez, a soft-spoken man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and graying beard, met them at his front door wearing a flannel shirt and holding a steaming mug of tea. "Officer Reynolds, good to see you again, Doctor," Martinez said. He had known Mark for several years through community meetings and had always appreciated the officer's thoughtful approach to neighborhood concerns. "I wanted to follow up on that bear I saw Monday evening. It was definitely the same large male. I got a better look this time." "What did you observe?" Lisa asked, pulling out her notebook. "It was about 6:30 in the evening, just as I was grilling dinner on the back deck. I heard my dog Rex barking frantically inside the house. When I looked toward the tree line, there it was. Maybe 60 yards away, just standing at the edge of my property. Massive animal. It watched me for probably 30 seconds, then turned and walked away like it owned the place." Mark studied the tree line behind Dr. Martinez's property. The spruce trees grew thick and tall, providing excellent cover for large animals. A well-worn game trail was visible leading from the trees toward a small creek that flowed behind several houses in the neighborhood. "Did it show any aggressive behavior? Any indication it was interested in your grill or food?" Mark asked. "No," nothing like that. It seemed curious, maybe, but definitely not afraid. That's what concerned me most. A bear that size should be more wary of humans. Lisa made detailed notes while Mark examined the area more closely. He found several clear paw prints in the soft earth near the creek. Massive impressions that confirmed Dr. Martinez's description of an unusually large bear. The prints measured nearly 12 inches long, indicating an animal of substantial size and weight. Their next stop was at the home of Sandra Wheeler, a retired teacher who lived 3 houses down from Dr. Martinez. Sandra, 73 years old with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, had been a fixture in the neighborhood for over 30 years. Her small house was immaculately maintained, surrounded by flower gardens that she tended with obsessive care. "That bear has been through my yard twice this week," Sandra informed them, leading them to her kitchen window. "Both times at night, but my motion sensor lights caught it. I've got the footage on my security camera if you want to see it." And the security footage, time-stamped at 11:47 p.m. on July 16th, showed a massive grizzly moving slowly across Sandra's backyard. The bear paused to investigate her bird feeders, which had been empty since she'd removed them earlier in the week on Dr. Foster's recommendation. It then continued toward the neighbor's property, moving with the confident gait of an animal completely comfortable in its surroundings. "Mrs. Wheeler," Mark said, "I want you to know that you did exactly the right thing removing those bird feeders, but I think you should consider staying inside after dark until this situation is resolved." "Officer, I've lived in Alaska for 40 years. I know how to coexist with wildlife, but this bear feels different. It's not acting like the others I've seen over the years." By 8:30 a.m., Mark and Lisa had completed their patrol of the University West neighborhood and were heading back toward the station. They had documented 3 more bear sightings from the previous week, all involving the same large male. The pattern was becoming clear. The bear was establishing a regular route through the residential area, probably following the creek and game trails that connected to its primary territory in the wilderness. As they drove back along Cushman Street, Mark's radio crackled with a routine call about a minor traffic accident near the Fred Meyer store. It was exactly the kind of mundane police work that filled most of their shifts, helping citizens with everyday problems, maintaining visibility in the community, and handling the occasional minor crime that occurred in Fairbanks' generally peaceful environment. At 8:45 a.m., they arrived back at the station to complete their paperwork and brief Sergeant Kowalski on their findings. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning off the light mist that often hung over the Chena River Valley. It was shaping up to be a beautiful summer day with clear skies and temperatures rising toward the predicted high of 68 degrees. Mark parked their patrol car in its designated spot beside the station and was reaching for his paperwork when Lisa's radio erupted with an urgent call from dispatch. All units, report of a large bear in the downtown area, intersection of Cushman and 5th Avenue. Multiple callers reporting a grizzly bear near the bus station. Use extreme caution." The intersection of Cushman and 5th Avenue was less than 6 blocks from their current location. Mark felt his pulse quicken as he realized that the bear they had been tracking all morning had somehow made its way into the heart of downtown Fairbanks. "Unit 7-2 responding," Lisa radioed back, her voice calm and professional despite the unusual nature of the call. Mark started the engine and activated their emergency lights, though he kept the siren off to avoid creating additional panic. As they drove toward downtown, he could see people on the sidewalks pointing and looking around nervously. Several businesses had customers gathered at their windows, clearly watching for signs of the reported bear. The Fairbanks downtown area, while not large by most standards, was the commercial and governmental heart of the region. 5th Avenue served as one of the main east-west corridors, lined with banks, restaurants, and retail establishments. The bus station that had been mentioned in the call was a modest facility that served as the hub for local transportation, including routes that connected downtown with the university and residential areas. As they approached the intersection, Mark could see a small crowd gathered near the visitor center, all looking toward a cluster of buildings that housed several restaurants and shops. Traffic had slowed to a crawl as drivers tried to see what was causing the commotion. There, Lisa pointed toward an alley between two brick buildings. I can see people backing away from something. Mark positioned their patrol car to block traffic while maintaining a safe distance from the reported bear location. Through 17 years of police work, he had learned that wildlife encounters required patience and careful assessment rather than aggressive intervention. The goal was always to ensure human safety while giving the animal an opportunity to leave the area voluntarily. As they approached on foot, maintaining communication with dispatch, Mark could see the source of the commotion. The massive grizzly they had been tracking all morning was now standing near a dumpster behind Lavelle's Bistro, one of downtown Fairbanks' most popular restaurants. The bear appeared to be investigating garbage that had been scattered around the dumpster area, probably by ravens or other scavengers during the night. Dr. Amanda Foster's briefing 3 days earlier had emphasized that bears in urban areas were almost always seeking food sources. Restaurants, with their concentration of food waste and cooking odors, were particularly attractive to hungry bears. The key to managing such encounters was to eliminate the food attraction while giving the bear a clear escape route back to its natural habitat. Dispatch Unit 7-2 on scene at 5th and Cushman, Mark radioed. We have visual confirmation of a large grizzly bear behind the Lavelle's Bistro building. The bear appears to be foraging in the dumpster area. We're establishing a perimeter and will monitor the situation. Request immediate contact with Fish and Game. The bear, estimated at the scene to weigh between 700 and 800 pounds, was an impressive specimen. Its chocolate brown fur was thick and healthy looking, with the distinctive shoulder hump that identified it as a grizzly rather than a black bear. The animal moved with the confident, unhurried pace of an apex predator, completely unconcerned by the growing crowd of onlookers, maintaining a respectful distance. Lisa had positioned herself to direct traffic and keep civilians back, while Mark coordinated with dispatch. Additional patrol units were en route, along with Dr. Foster from Fish and Game. The immediate priority was containment, ensuring that the bear didn't move toward areas with higher concentrations of people while maintaining escape routes that would allow it to return to the wilderness. At 9:07 a.m., the situation took an unexpected turn. A delivery truck, apparently unaware of the bear's presence, turned into the alley behind the restaurant to make a scheduled food service delivery. The driver, startled by the sight of police vehicles and the crowd, honked his horn loudly as he backed out of the alley. The sound of the horn, echoing off the brick buildings in the confined space, caused an immediate change in the bear's behavior. Where it had previously been calm and focused on foraging, it now raised its head alertly and began looking around for the source of the noise. Dr. Foster would later explain that sudden loud noises in confined spaces could trigger a fight-or-flight response in bears, particularly those already stressed by being outside their normal territory. Mark immediately recognized the change in the bear's demeanor. Its body posture shifted from relaxed foraging to alert awareness, and it began moving away from the dumpster area with more purpose and speed. Unfortunately, the bear's chosen direction of travel was toward Cushman Street, rather than back toward the wilderness areas to the east. "Lisa, we need to clear that intersection now," Mark called out, moving quickly but carefully to position himself between the bear and the area where curious onlookers had gathered. "Get everyone back to the other side of the street." The next few minutes unfolded with the kind of tense precision that characterized emergency response in Alaska. Mark had been trained in wildlife encounter protocols, but there was a significant difference between training scenarios and facing down a 780-pound grizzly bear in downtown Fairbanks. The bear was now moving with clear purpose toward the intersection, and Mark realized that it was likely seeking the most direct route back to familiar territory. The problem was that the most direct route would take the bear through one of the busiest intersections in downtown Fairbanks during the morning rush hour. Mark made a split-second decision that would be analyzed and debated in the weeks that followed. He positioned himself and his patrol car to try to redirect the bear's movement away from the intersection and toward a less populated area. At 9:12 a.m., the bear emerged from the alley between the buildings and stepped onto the sidewalk along Cushman Street. The sight of the massive animal in the heart of downtown Fairbanks created an immediate sensation among the witnesses present. Several people began taking photos and videos with their cell phones, despite repeated warnings from Lisa to maintain distance. Mark activated his patrol car's PA system and began speaking in calm, measured tones. "This is the Fairbanks Police. For your safety, please move away from the intersection and enter the nearest building. Do not run. Move slowly and calmly away from the area." The bear paused on the sidewalk, clearly assessing its surroundings. It could see the crowd of people, the patrol cars, and the busy street ahead. For a moment, it seemed uncertain about its next move. This was the critical moment that wildlife experts later identified as the point where intervention might have successfully redirected the animal. Dr. Foster arrived on scene at 9:15 a.m., just as the situation was reaching its most critical phase. She quickly assessed the bear's position and behavior, noting signs of stress and confusion that indicated the animal was outside its comfort zone and looking for an escape route. Her immediate recommendation was to create a clear corridor for the bear to move east, away from downtown and back toward its natural habitat. "We need to open up 7th Avenue, Doctor," Foster told Mark over the radio. "If we can get traffic cleared and create a corridor, the bear will probably follow the path of least resistance back toward the wilderness areas." The plan made sense in theory, but implementation proved challenging. The bear, now clearly agitated by the noise and activity surrounding it, began moving more quickly along the sidewalk. It was no longer the calm, foraging animal they had observed behind the restaurant. This was a stressed, wild animal, seeking the fastest way out of an unfamiliar and threatening environment. At 9:18 a.m., everything changed. A city bus, following its regular route along Cushman Street, came around the corner and saw the bear on the sidewalk ahead. The driver, 34-year-old James Petrov, had been driving city buses for 8 years, but had never encountered anything like this situation. He brought the bus to a quick stop and opened the doors to allow the 3 passengers to exit safely. The sound of the bus's air brakes hissing, combined with the diesel engine noise, created exactly the kind of sudden loud sound that Dr. Foster had warned could trigger an aggressive response from a stressed bear. The grizzly, already on edge from the unfamiliar surroundings and crowd, interpreted the bus as a threat and responded accordingly. What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses later gave varying accounts of the exact sequence of events. The bear, moving with surprising speed for such a large animal, charged across the intersection toward the perceived threat. Mark, positioned between the bear and the bus, found himself directly in the animal's path. The charge of a grizzly bear is one of nature's most formidable displays of power and speed. Despite weighing nearly 800 pounds, the bear covered the 30 yards between the sidewalk and Mark's position in approximately 3 seconds, reaching speeds of over 30 miles per hour. Mark had seconds to react, and his training kicked in automatically. Rather than running, which would have triggered the bear's chase instinct, Mark stood his ground and made himself appear as large as possible while speaking in calm, firm tones. "Easy, bear. Easy now." He slowly reached for the bear spray on his duty belt, a canister of concentrated pepper spray, specifically designed for wildlife encounters. The bear closed the distance rapidly, but at the last moment, something in Mark's calm demeanor or the chemical scent of the bear spray seemed to register. Instead of making contact, the bear swerved slightly and collided with the front quarter panel of the patrol car parked beside Mark. The impact was tremendous. The 780-pound bear, moving at considerable speed, struck the patrol car with enough force to rock the vehicle on its suspension and create a significant dent in the front fender and hood. The bear, momentarily stunned by the collision, shook its head and looked around as if trying to understand what had just happened. Mark, who had been thrown backward by the force of the displaced air and the bear's proximity, found himself on the ground, but largely uninjured. His quick thinking and the bear's last-second change of direction had prevented what could have been a fatal encounter. He remained motionless on the ground, knowing that any sudden movement could restart the bear's aggressive behavior. For several tense seconds, the bear stood beside the damaged patrol car, breathing heavily and looking around at the scene. The intersection had been cleared of civilians, but Mark could see Lisa approaching carefully from behind, her own canister of bear spray ready. Dr. Foster was coordinating with additional fish and game personnel who had arrived with tranquilizer equipment. The bear, apparently satisfied that the immediate threat had been neutralized, began moving away from the intersection. Its body language indicated that the aggressive phase had passed, and it was now primarily interested in leaving the area. Dr. Foster later explained that bears typically don't maintain aggressive behavior for extended periods unless continuously threatened or defending cubs or food sources. At 9:23 a.m., the bear began moving east along 7th Avenue, following exactly the escape route that Dr. Foster had recommended. Additional police units had cleared traffic from the street, creating an open corridor that led directly toward the wilderness areas beyond the city limits. The bear's pace was steady, but not hurried, indicating that it was no longer in full flight mode, but was definitely leaving the area. Mark remained on the ground until Dr. Foster gave the all-clear signal, then slowly got to his feet. A quick assessment revealed that he had suffered only minor scrapes and bruises from his fall, along with what would later prove to be a mild concussion from hitting his head on the pavement. The adrenaline coursing through his system masked the immediate pain, but he would feel the full effects of the encounter in the hours that followed. Lisa was the first to reach him, her relief evident as she helped him check for injuries. "Mark, are you okay? Can you move everything?" "I think so," Mark replied, testing his arms and legs. "That was closer than I ever want to come to a bear again." The damaged patrol car told the story of the encounter's intensity. The front quarter panel was severely dented, the hood had a significant depression where the bear's shoulder had struck, and the headlight assembly was cracked. The impact had been powerful enough to trigger the car's impact sensors, though the airbags had not deployed, since no human occupant had been inside during the collision. Dr. Foster approached as Mark was being checked by paramedics who had arrived as part of the emergency response. "Officer Reynolds, that was exactly the right response. Standing your ground and using calm body language probably prevented a much more serious outcome." Over the next hour, the bear continued its movement east through the less populated areas of Fairbanks, eventually disappearing into the wilderness areas along the Chena River. Dr. Foster and her team tracked its movement using radio telemetry equipment, confirming that it had left the urban area and returned to its natural habitat. The incident had lasted less than 15 minutes from start to finish, but its impact on Mark, the Fairbanks Police Department, and the community was immediate and significant. Word of the downtown bear encounter spread rapidly through social media and local news outlets, drawing attention from wildlife experts and law enforcement agencies throughout Alaska. Mark was taken to Fairbanks Memorial Hospital for evaluation, where emergency room physician Dr. Sarah Kim conducted a thorough examination. Dr. Kim, an emergency medicine specialist who had treated numerous trauma cases during her 5 years in Fairbanks, was struck by how close Mark had come to serious injury. "Officer Reynolds, you're extremely fortunate, Doctor," Kim told him as she reviewed his x-rays. "You have a mild concussion and some significant bruising, but no broken bones or internal injuries. The bear's decision to hit the car instead of you made all the difference." The concussion symptoms included headache, mild dizziness, and some difficulty concentrating, all typical results of the head impact when Mark fell to the pavement. Dr. Kim prescribed rest and observation, with instructions to return immediately if symptoms worsened. She also recommended counseling to help process the psychological impact of the encounter. Jennifer Reynolds arrived at the hospital within an hour of receiving the call about the incident. A nurse at the same hospital, she understood both the medical and emotional implications of what had happened to her husband. The couple had been married for 15 years and had faced various challenges associated with police work, but nothing quite like this. "The important thing is that you're alive," Jennifer told Mark as he lay in the hospital bed, holding his hand tightly. "Everything else can be fixed or replaced." The psychological impact of the encounter began manifesting within hours of the incident. Mark found himself replaying the moments over and over, analyzing every decision and wondering what might have happened if events had unfolded differently. This type of hypervigilance and intrusive thoughts are common after traumatic incidents, particularly those involving life-threatening situations. Dr. Patricia Williams, the hospital's staff psychologist, met with Mark before his discharge. Dr. Williams specialized in trauma counseling and had extensive experience working with first responders who had experienced critical incidents. She explained that his emotional responses were completely normal and provided initial coping strategies for managing the stress. "What you experienced today was a life-threatening situation that activated your body's survival responses," Dr. Williams explained. "Your training and instincts served you well, but your mind and body will need time to process what happened. Don't be surprised if you experience some anxiety, sleep disturbances, or hypervigilance over the next few days." The Fairbanks Police Department's response to the incident was swift and comprehensive. Chief Robert Martinez, no relation to Dr. Robert Martinez, immediately ordered a full review of the department's wildlife encounter protocols and began coordinating with Fish and Game officials to develop enhanced training programs for officers. Chief Martinez, a 30-year law enforcement veteran who had led the Fairbanks Police Department for 8 years, recognized that the incident represented a significant challenge for his officers and the community. Urban wildlife encounters were becoming more frequent as development pressured traditional animal habitats, and law enforcement agencies needed to adapt their training and protocols accordingly. Officer Reynolds handled this situation exactly as he was trained to do, Chief Martinez told reporters during a press conference later that day. His quick thinking and calm response prevented what could have been a much more serious outcome. "We'll be working with Fish and Game to ensure all our officers have the best possible training for these types of encounters." The investigation into the incident was conducted jointly by the Fairbanks Police Department and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. The goal was to understand the factors that had led to the bear's appearance in downtown Fairbanks and to develop strategies for preventing similar incidents in the future. Dr. Foster's preliminary analysis identified several contributing factors. The late spring had delayed natural food sources, forcing bears to expand their foraging ranges. Recent heavy rainfall had washed out many berry crops that bears typically relied on during summer months, and restaurant waste management practices in the downtown area had created attractants that drew wildlife into urban spaces. The bear itself, designated as Bear Number 47 for tracking purposes, was eventually located and fitted with a GPS collar to monitor its movements. Dr. Foster's team determined that it was a healthy adult male in its prime, with no signs of disease or abnormal behavior patterns. The encounter appeared to be a case of a hungry bear following food scents into an unfamiliar environment and becoming stressed when surrounded by humans and urban noise. The damaged patrol car became something of a symbol within the Fairbanks Police Department. Rather than being immediately repaired, it was temporarily displayed at the station as a reminder of the encounter and the importance of wildlife safety training. The dents and scratches served as a tangible record of how quickly routine police work could become life-threatening in Alaska. Mark returned to duty 1 week after the incident, following medical clearance and a psychological evaluation. However, the experience had changed his perspective on police work and his relationship with the Alaskan wilderness. He found himself more aware of his surroundings, particularly when working in areas near wilderness boundaries. The first few days back on duty were challenging. Every radio call seemed to trigger memories of the bear encounter, and Mark found himself checking and rechecking his bear spray whenever he left the patrol car. Lisa proved to be an invaluable partner during this adjustment period, providing both professional support and understanding as Mark worked through the psychological aftermath of the incident. "It's normal to feel hypervigilant after something like that," Lisa told him during one of their patrols through the University West neighborhood. "Your brain is just trying to protect you by staying extra alert. It should ease up over time." The community response to the incident was overwhelmingly supportive. Residents throughout Fairbanks expressed appreciation for Mark's actions and concern for his well-being. Many people who had witnessed the encounter stopped by the police station to check on his recovery and to share their own perspectives on what had happened. Dr. Martinez, the geology professor, visited the station personally to thank Mark for his service and to discuss improved wildlife management strategies for their neighborhood. "Officer Reynolds, what you did took real courage. That bear could have seriously injured or killed you, but you put yourself at risk to protect the rest of us." The media coverage of the incident extended far beyond Fairbanks, drawing attention from wildlife experts and law enforcement agencies throughout North America. The dramatic nature of the encounter, combined with the dramatic backdrop of downtown Fairbanks, made it a compelling story for news outlets focused on human-wildlife conflicts. National Geographic contacted Dr. Foster to discuss the incident for a documentary they were producing about urban wildlife encounters. The Discovery Channel expressed interest in featuring the story in their series about dangerous jobs. However, both Mark and the Fairbanks Police Department declined most media requests, preferring to focus on recovery and improved training rather than publicity. 3 weeks after the incident, Mark met with Dr. Williams for a follow-up counseling session. The psychological symptoms had gradually decreased, though he still experienced occasional nightmares and moments of anxiety when encountering unexpected sounds or movements while on duty. "The fact that you're sleeping better and having fewer intrusive thoughts is a good sign," Dr. Williams told him. "Trauma recovery is rarely linear, so don't be concerned if you have occasional setbacks. Your brain is still processing what happened, and that's completely normal." The long-term impact of the encounter on Mark's career was significant but largely positive. He became the department's unofficial expert on wildlife encounters, providing training to new officers and serving as a liaison with fish and game officials. His calm response to the bear attack had earned him respect throughout the law enforcement community and beyond. 6 months after the incident, the Fairbanks Police Department implemented new protocols for wildlife encounters based on lessons learned from Mark's experience. All officers received enhanced training in bear behavior and encounter management, and patrol cars were equipped with additional bear spray and noise-making devices designed to deter wildlife without causing injury. Dr. Foster's research team continued monitoring bear number 47 through its GPS collar, documenting its movements and behavior patterns throughout the following year. The bear never again ventured into urban areas, apparently having learned that human settlements were sources of stress rather than food. It established a large territory in the wilderness areas east of Fairbanks and was observed successfully mating during the following spring. The damaged patrol car was eventually repaired and returned to service, but not before serving its purpose as a training tool and reminder of the encounter's significance. The repair costs, covered by the department's insurance, totaled nearly $8,000, a tangible measure of the force involved in the bear's collision with the vehicle. Mark's relationship with Jennifer was strengthened by the incident, as they both gained a deeper appreciation for the risks and unpredictability of life in Alaska. They began taking more camping and hiking trips together, partly as a way for Mark to reclaim his comfort level in wilderness settings where bears were a natural part of the environment. The ironic thing is that I'm probably safer in the woods now than I was before, Mark reflected during one of their hiking trips 6 months after the incident. I have a much better understanding of bear behavior and my own reactions. The encounter taught me to trust my training and stay calm under pressure. The broader implications of the incident extended throughout the Fairbanks community and Alaska's wildlife management community. The encounter highlighted the ongoing challenges of balancing urban development with wildlife conservation, particularly in a state where much of the population lives in close proximity to wilderness areas. Restaurant owners throughout downtown Fairbanks implemented improved waste management practices, including better secured dumpsters and more frequent garbage collection. The city government developed new ordinances regarding food waste storage and wildlife attractants in commercial areas. The University of Alaska Fairbanks incorporated the incident into their wildlife biology curriculum, using it as a case study in human-wildlife conflict management. Dr. Foster's detailed analysis of the encounter became required reading for students studying wildlife management and conservation biology. 1 year after the incident, Mark was recognized with the Fairbanks Police Department's Award for Valor, acknowledging his courage and professionalism during the bear encounter. The ceremony, attended by his family, colleagues, and community members, served as a celebration of both his survival and his continued service to the community. Officer Reynolds exemplifies the best qualities of Alaska law enforcement, Chief Martinez said during the award presentation. His actions during the bear encounter demonstrated courage, training, and the kind of clear thinking that protects both public safety and wildlife. He handled an extraordinary situation with extraordinary professionalism. The psychological recovery process continued for many months after the initial incident. Mark worked regularly with Dr. Williams and found that discussing the encounter with other first responders who had faced similar traumatic situations was particularly helpful. The Fairbanks Police Department established a peer support program, partly in response to the lessons learned from Mark's experience. 2 years after the encounter, Mark was promoted to sergeant, recognition of both his leadership capabilities and his expertise in wildlife encounter management. His experience during the bear incident had given him a unique perspective on crisis management and decision-making under pressure that proved valuable in his supervisory role. The patrol car that had been damaged in the incident was eventually retired from service and donated to the University of Alaska Fairbanks for use in their law enforcement training program. The dents and scratches from the bear's impact were preserved as a reminder of the encounter and a teaching tool for future officers. Mark continued his career with the Fairbanks Police Department, eventually serving as the department's training coordinator and primary liaison with wildlife agencies. His experience during the bear encounter shaped not only his own career, but also the department's approach to officer safety and community protection in Alaska's unique environment. The incident became a defining moment in Fairbanks' relationship with its surrounding wilderness. It served as a reminder that the boundary between urban and wild was often less distinct than residents might assume, and that successful coexistence required ongoing vigilance, proper training, and respect for the power and unpredictability of Alaska's wildlife. Years later, Mark would often reflect on the split-second decisions and circumstances that had determined the outcome of that July morning. The bear's last-minute swerve toward the patrol car instead of continuing its charge, his own training and instinctive response, and the quick arrival of backup and wildlife experts had all contributed to an outcome that could easily have been tragic. "I learned that you can't control everything that happens to you," Mark would tell new officers during training sessions, "but you can control how you respond, and sometimes that makes all the difference. Training, preparation, and staying calm under pressure, those are the things that got me through that day." The encounter with bear number 47 became part of Fairbanks folklore, a story told and retold throughout the community as an example of both the dangers and the wonders of life in Alaska. It served as a reminder that humans and wildlife shared the landscape, and that successful coexistence required understanding, respect, and constant vigilance from both law enforcement and the community they served. Dr. Foster's ongoing research into human-wildlife conflicts used the incident as a foundation for developing new management strategies throughout Alaska. The lessons learned from that 15-minute encounter in downtown Fairbanks contributed to improved safety protocols and wildlife management practices across the state. The story of Mark Reynolds and bear number 47 ultimately became more than just an account of a dangerous encounter. It became a symbol of Alaska's ongoing challenge to balance human development with wildlife conservation, and a testament to the courage and professionalism of those who serve on the front lines of that balance every day. The next stories: giant Kodiak bear rips open bus, 14 adults injured, November 22, 2024. The November morning broke cold and grey over Sitka, Alaska, the kind of pewter sky that promised either rain or snow before nightfall. At 5:47 a.m., the temperature hovered at 31 degrees Fahrenheit, with a bitter wind cutting down from the Tongass National Forest that made it feel closer to 20. Steam rose from coffee cups in the staging area behind Miller & Sons Forestry headquarters, where 14 men and women stomped their boots and pulled knit caps lower over their ears, waiting for the company bus that would take them 43 miles northeast to Cutting Unit 7 Alpha. Marcus Rodriguez had been driving for Miller & Sons for 11 years, navigating the treacherous logging roads that snaked through some of Alaska's most remote wilderness. At 47, he possessed the steady hands and patient temperament that made him the company's most trusted driver for the dangerous routes. His personnel file noted 0 accidents in over 800,000 miles of wilderness driving, a record that management cited whenever insurance representatives questioned their remote operation protocols. This morning, Marcus performed his standard pre-trip inspection of Bus Unit 3, a reinforced 2019 Ford E450 chassis with custom seating for 18 passengers, equipped with all-weather tires, emergency communication equipment, and reinforced steel plating along the lower panels, specifically designed to withstand encounters with local wildlife. The bus itself represented a significant investment in worker safety. Miller & Sons had purchased 3 identical units in 2020 for $127,000 each, following a near-miss incident in 2019 when a brown bear had approached a standard passenger van on the Kazniku Bay Road. The reinforced vehicles featured double-pane safety glass, steel mesh over all windows, emergency exits at both front and rear, satellite communication systems, and medical supply kits that exceeded Coast Guard requirements for remote operations. Each bus carried emergency rations for 24 hours, water purification tablets, flares, emergency blankets, and a comprehensive first aid kit that included trauma supplies, pain medications, antibiotics, and equipment for treating hypothermia and shock. Sarah Chen, the crew supervisor, had been reviewing the day's cutting plan when Marcus finished his inspection. At 34, Sarah held a degree in forest management from the University of Alaska Fairbanks and had worked for Miller & Sons for 6 years, rising from general laborer to crew chief based on her meticulous attention to safety protocols and her ability to maximize timber yield while maintaining environmental compliance. Her crew respected her not just for her technical knowledge, but for her willingness to work alongside them in conditions that would challenge seasoned outdoorsmen. Today's assignment involved selective cutting in a 127-acre section that had been surveyed and marked 3 weeks earlier, with an estimated yield of 2,400 board feet of premium Sitka spruce and western hemlock. The crew assembling behind the headquarters building represented a cross-section of Alaska's working population. James Big Jim Patterson, at 6 feet 4 inches and 280 pounds, served as the crew's lead faller, capable of dropping trees with surgical precision in terrain where a miscalculation could prove fatal. Originally from Louisiana, Jim had come north 15 years earlier following a messy divorce and discovered that his natural strength and mechanical aptitude translated well to forest work. His annual earnings of $67,000 made him one of the highest-paid crew members, but those wages came with risks that kept his ex-wife's lawyer busy updating beneficiary information. Tommy Nguyen operated the portable sawmill equipment, a complex array of hydraulic systems and precision cutting tools that could process a 30-foot log into dimensional lumber in less than 4 minutes. At 28, Tommy possessed an engineer's mind trapped in a laborer's body, constantly modifying and improving the equipment to increase efficiency and reduce maintenance downtime. His detailed logs showed productivity improvements of 17% over the past 2 seasons, innovations that had earned him a bonus structure and consideration for a management position. Tommy's girlfriend, Lisa, worked as a dispatcher for Alaska State Troopers, and she worried constantly about his assignments in areas where help could be hours away, even in perfect conditions. Maria Gonzalez handled crew safety compliance, a position created after OSHA had cited Miller & Sons for inadequate safety protocols following a 2018 incident where a falling branch had seriously injured 2 workers. Maria's background as a former Army medic made her invaluable in remote locations, and her no-nonsense approach to safety had reduced worker compensation claims by 43% since her hiring. She carried advanced trauma supplies and maintained certification in wilderness first aid, emergency medicine, and helicopter rescue coordination. At 31, Maria had seen enough industrial accidents to know that wilderness work demanded constant vigilance and that overconfidence killed more experienced workers than any other factor. The newest crew member, David Park, had joined Miller & Sons just 6 weeks earlier, relocating from Seattle after losing his construction job during the economic downturn. At 25, David possessed enthusiasm and basic forestry training from community college, but lacked the instinctive awareness of wilderness dangers that developed only through years of experience. His eagerness to prove himself sometimes concerned Maria, who had seen too many new workers injured while trying to demonstrate their capabilities to seasoned crews. David's student loans and credit card debt totaled nearly $43,000, making the $18 per hour starting wage at Miller & Sons a financial necessity, despite his family's concerns about the dangers of wilderness work. Robert Dutch Henderson served as equipment maintenance specialist, responsible for keeping chainsaws, generators and processing equipment operational in conditions that destroyed machinery designed for urban use. At 52, Dutch had worked in Alaska's resource extraction industries for over 30 years, starting as a 19-year-old on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline and transitioning to logging when oil work became scarce. His workshop behind the headquarters building contained tens of thousands of dollars in specialized tools and spare parts, and his ability to repair complex equipment using improvised materials had saved operations on dozens of occasions. Dutch's personnel file included commendations from management and co-workers alike, praising his ability to solve mechanical problems under pressure. Angela Morris worked as a timber cruiser, responsible for assessing standing forests and marking trees for harvest according to environmental regulations and market demands. Her degree in natural resources from Colorado State University had prepared her for the technical aspects of forest management, but 4 years in Alaska had taught her the practical skills necessary for working in wilderness areas where grizzly bears, unpredictable weather, and terrain that could trap or injure the unwary posed daily challenges. Angela's reports on timber quality and environmental compliance protected Miller and Sons from federal penalties that could shut down operations, making her attention to detail essential for the company's continued operation. Kevin Santos had been operating heavy equipment for Miller and Sons for 8 years, primarily running the skidder that dragged felled trees from cutting areas to processing locations. The 35,000-pound machine required skill and experience to operate safely on steep, uneven terrain covered with stumps, rocks, and fallen logs that could damage equipment or injure operators. Kevin's safety record remained spotless despite working in conditions that had hospitalized 3 previous skidder operators, a testament to his cautious approach and mechanical sympathy. His wife, Carmen, worked as a nurse at Sitka Community Hospital, and their combined incomes allowed them to maintain a middle-class lifestyle while building college funds for their twin daughters. Lisa Reeves served as the crew's communications specialist, responsible for maintaining radio contact with headquarters and coordinating supply deliveries, equipment repairs, and emergency responses. Her background in military communications had prepared her for the technical challenges of maintaining radio contact across 40-plus miles of mountainous terrain. But civilian logging operations presented unique challenges in terms of coordinating multiple agencies and maintaining safety protocols without military command structures. Lisa's detailed logs of daily communications, weather reports, and operational updates provided documentation that protected Miller and Sons from liability claims while ensuring that crews received timely support and emergency assistance when needed. Michael Thompson operated the delimbing equipment that removed branches from felled trees before processing. The hydraulic-powered machinery could exert over 20,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, capable of crushing bones or severing limbs if operators made mistakes or lost concentration. At 41, Michael had been working in logging operations for 19 years, starting in Oregon before moving north to take advantage of Alaska's higher wages and year-round work opportunities. His experience with dangerous equipment made him naturally cautious, but recent financial pressures from his ex-wife's medical bills had created stress that sometimes affected his concentration. Sandra White handled environmental compliance monitoring, ensuring that cutting operations met federal and state regulations designed to protect salmon streams, eagle nesting areas, and sensitive ecosystems. Her master's degree in environmental science from the University of Washington had prepared her for the complex regulatory environment surrounding logging operations, but fieldwork in remote Alaska had taught her practical skills that academic training couldn't provide. Sandra's reports and photographs documented compliance with environmental regulations, protecting Miller and Sons from fines that could reach hundreds of thousands of dollars for serious violations. The final crew member, Carlos Mendoza, worked as a general laborer and backup equipment operator, filling whatever role needed additional manpower on any given day. At 19, Carlos represented the youngest member of the crew, hired straight from high school, despite his lack of experience because of his willingness to learn and his physical capabilities. His immigration from Guatemala at age 12 had instilled a work ethic that impressed even veteran loggers, but his youth and inexperience concerned crew supervisors who understood that wilderness work punished mistakes with injuries or death. At 6:23 a.m., Marcus completed his final equipment check and signaled for the crew to board. The routine had been repeated hundreds of times over the years, with workers stowing personal gear in overhead compartments and settling into seats according to unofficial traditions that placed newer employees toward the front and veterans in the rear. Sarah Chen always sat directly behind Marcus to maintain communication with headquarters and coordinate any changes to the day's work plan. Maria Gonzalez chose a seat midway back, where she could monitor all crew members for signs of fatigue, illness, or other problems that might create safety issues. The 43-mile route to Cutting Unit 7 Alpha began on paved highways, but quickly transitioned to gravel logging roads that demanded constant attention from even experienced drivers. The first 18 miles followed Alaska Route 7 northwest from Sitka, passing through relatively developed areas with cell phone coverage and regular traffic. The route then turned northeast onto Forest Service Road 2180, a narrow gravel road that climbed steadily through old-growth forest toward the higher elevations, where timber cutting operations were concentrated. Marcus had driven this particular route 47 times over the past 2 years, making detailed mental notes of washouts, steep grades, sharp curves, and wildlife crossing areas that required reduced speeds and extra caution. His personal logbook contained notes about seasonal variations in road conditions, optimal speeds for different weather conditions, and locations where bears, moose, and other wildlife were commonly encountered. Experience had taught him that November represented one of the most dangerous times for wildlife encounters, as animals prepared for winter by increasing their food intake and becoming more aggressive in defending food sources. The bus left Sitka at 6:31 a.m., 7 minutes behind schedule due to equipment loading delays, carrying 14 crew members, their personal gear, specialized safety equipment, emergency supplies, and enough food and water for a 12-hour workday. Weather reports indicated partly cloudy conditions, with temperatures rising to 38 degrees, light winds from the southwest, and a 30% chance of rain after 2 p.m. Road conditions were reported as fair to good, with some slush and ice patches expected above 2,000 feet elevation. The first segment of the journey proceeded normally, with crew members reviewing the day's assignments, checking equipment, and discussing techniques for maximizing productivity while maintaining safety standards. Sarah Chen used her radio to confirm arrangements for equipment delivery and coordinate with headquarters about afternoon pickup schedules. The conversation remained professional but relaxed, reflecting the crew's experience and confidence in their abilities and equipment. At 6:58 a.m., the bus reached the junction with Forest Service Road 2180 and began the transition from paved highway to gravel logging road. Marcus reduced speed from 55 to 35 miles per hour and activated the four-wheel drive system as the road surface changed from asphalt to compacted gravel with patches of mud and standing water from recent rainfall. The route immediately became more demanding, with steep grades, sharp curves, and narrow passages that required precise vehicle positioning to avoid rocks, stumps, and drainage ditches. The logging road had been constructed in 1987 to access timber sales in the upper Kazniku River watershed. following ridgelines and valley floors to minimize construction costs and environmental impact. The single-lane road included turnouts every quarter-mile to allow opposing traffic to pass, but encounters with other vehicles were rare due to careful scheduling by area logging companies. Road maintenance remained minimal, limited to grading twice per year, and emergency repairs to washouts and bridge damage caused by winter storms and spring flooding. As the bus climbed steadily through dense stands of Sitka spruce and western hemlock, the crew's conversation gradually diminished as members dozed or reviewed work assignments. The combination of early morning departure, steady engine noise, and comfortable seating often produced drowsiness during the longer drives to remote work sites. Maria Gonzalez remained alert, periodically scanning crew members for signs of illness or other problems that might affect work safety, while Sarah Chen maintained radio communication with headquarters and monitored weather updates that could impact the day's operations. At 7:24 a.m., the bus reached mile marker 23 on Forest Service Road 2180, entering an area where wildlife encounters were more common due to the presence of salmon streams and seasonal berry patches that attracted brown bears and black bears throughout the summer and fall months. Marcus reduced speed to 25 miles per hour and activated the bus's warning lights as prescribed by company safety protocols. The road in this section followed Kasniku Creek for approximately 4 miles, passing through habitat that supported one of Alaska's densest brown bear populations. Recent Alaska Department of Fish and Game surveys had documented at least 12 brown bears using the Kasniku Creek watershed, including a large male that had been tagged and monitored since 2019. Bear 47, male, as designated in department records, weighed an estimated 987 pounds and stood over 9 feet tall when upright. The massive Kodiak bear had been observed throughout the area during salmon runs, berry season, and the pre-hibernation period, when bears consumed up to 20,000 calories per day to build fat reserves for winter dormancy. Wildlife biologists considered bear 47 male to be a dominant territorial male that had successfully defended prime feeding areas against other bears for the past 3 seasons. His territory encompassed approximately 27 square miles of prime habitat, including the salmon streams, berry patches, and game trails that provided optimal foraging opportunities. Recent tracking data indicated that Bear 47 male had not entered hibernation despite the advanced season, possibly due to abundant food sources or disturbance from logging operations that had increased human activity in the area. Local logging companies had reported 13 bear sightings along Forest Service Road 2180 during the past 6 weeks, including 3 encounters where bears had approached or damaged equipment. 2 incidents had required work stoppages until wildlife authorities could relocate problem bears, resulting in lost productivity and increased costs for affected companies. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game had issued advisories recommending extra caution in the Kasniku Creek area, but had not restricted access due to the economic importance of ongoing timber operations. At 7:31 a.m., Marcus noticed fresh bear tracks in mud beside the road near mile marker 25, indicating recent activity by a large animal. The tracks measured over 12 inches long and 8 inches wide, with claw marks extending nearly 4 inches beyond the toe pads. Based on his experience and wildlife training, Marcus estimated the tracks belonged to a brown bear, weighing between 800 and 1,000 pounds, significantly larger than the average 400 to 600 pound bears typically encountered in the area. Following company protocol, Marcus radioed headquarters to report the bear sign and requested guidance about continuing to the work site. Sarah Chen photographed the tracks with her digital camera and recorded GPS coordinates for later reporting to wildlife authorities. The crew became more alert as word of the bear tracks spread, with several members moving to windows to scan the forest for signs of wildlife activity. Dispatch confirmed that no recent bear warnings had been issued for the area and instructed the crew to continue to the worksite while maintaining extra vigilance. Standard protocol required work crews to carry bear spray, make noise while working, and maintain radio contact with headquarters every 2 hours when operating in areas with recent bear activity. If bears were observed within 100 yards of work operations, crews were instructed to cease activities and retreat to vehicles until the animals moved away. The road continued climbing toward the 2,800-foot elevation of Cutting Unit 7 Alpha, passing through increasingly steep terrain that offered limited visibility around curves and over ridgelines. Dense forest growth created shadowed areas where visibility remained poor even during daylight hours, and the combination of steep grades and narrow road width left little room for maneuvering if drivers encountered obstacles or wildlife. At 7:47 a.m., the bus rounded a sharp left-hand curve at mile marker 28 and entered a straight section, approximately 600 yards long, that descended toward a creek crossing. Marcus had negotiated this section safely on previous trips, but recent heavy rainfall had created new washouts and soft spots that required careful navigation. The creek crossing itself consisted of a single-lane bridge constructed from steel and concrete that was adequate for logging trucks and buses, but left no margin for error in vehicle positioning. As the bus descended the straight section at 15 miles per hour, Marcus noticed movement in the forest approximately 200 yards ahead on the right side of the road. His initial assessment suggested a moose or elk feeding in the undergrowth, a common sight that required reducing speed and preparing to stop if the animal entered the roadway. However, closer observation revealed the distinctive shoulder hump and massive head of a brown bear, much larger than any animal Marcus had previously encountered during 11 years of wilderness driving. Bear 47 male had been feeding on a moose carcass, approximately 50 yards from the road, when the bus appeared. The carcass, a young bull moose that had died 3 days earlier from injuries sustained in fights with other males during the rutting season, represented a significant food source during the critical pre-hibernation period. Brown bears were known to defend carcasses aggressively against other predators and scavengers, and human intrusion into feeding areas often triggered defensive behaviors that could escalate into attacks. The massive bear raised his head and stood upright to assess the approaching threat, revealing his full 9-foot height and enormous bulk. His thick winter coat, darkened by recent rain and matted with blood and debris from feeding, made him appear even larger and more intimidating. Scars across his face and shoulders testified to years of dominance battles with other bears, while his massive claws, over 4 inches long, remained visible even at a distance. Marcus immediately applied the brakes and activated the bus's emergency flashes while reaching for the radio to report the bear sighting. However, before he could complete the transmission, Bear 47 male dropped to all fours and began moving toward the road with a purposeful gait that suggested aggressive intent rather than simple curiosity. The bear's ears were laid back against his head, and his mouth was open, displaying teeth that could crush bones and tear through muscle and tissue with devastating efficiency. "Everyone stay calm and remain seated," Marcus announced over the bus's intercom system while continuing to brake. "We have a large brown bear approaching the road ahead. I'm going to try to back up and give him room to pass." The bus's speed had decreased to approximately 8 miles per hour, but momentum and the steep downgrade made immediate stopping difficult without risking loss of control on the gravel surface. Sarah Chen immediately contacted headquarters to report the situation and request guidance, while Maria Gonzalez began reviewing emergency protocols and preparing bear spray and emergency equipment. The crew members pressed against windows to observe the approaching bear, with several commenting on the animal's enormous size and aggressive posture. Tommy Nguyen began recording video with his cell phone, while David Park appeared visibly nervous about his first encounter with a brown bear in the wild. Bear 47 male reached the road edge and paused momentarily, swinging his massive head from side to side while assessing the bus as a potential threat to his food source. Brown bear behavior experts later noted that the bear's posture and movements indicated a defensive response rather than predatory aggression. But the distinction offered little comfort to the 14 crew members watching a 1,000-pound predator approach their vehicle. The bear began walking along the road toward the bus, closing the distance at a steady pace that demonstrated confidence and determination rather than fear or uncertainty. His massive paws, each larger than a dinner plate, left clear impressions in the gravel surface, while his rolling gait covered ground with deceptive speed. Wildlife biologists estimated that brown bears could reach speeds of 35 miles per hour in short bursts, making escape on foot impossible for humans in open terrain. Marcus attempted to shift the bus into reverse, but the combination of steep grade, loose gravel, and 43-mile distance from the nearest help made retreat problematic. The bus's diesel engine developed maximum power at higher RPMs, making low-speed maneuvering difficult under the best conditions. Additionally, the narrow road and steep drop-offs on both sides left little margin for error if the bus slid off the gravel surface or lost traction on the grade. At 7:52 a.m., Bear 47 male had closed to within 50 yards of the bus and showed no signs of changing direction or retreating into the forest. His continued approach suggested that he perceived the bus as a threat to his food source and was prepared to defend the moose carcass against intruders. Radio contact with headquarters confirmed that no immediate assistance was available, as the nearest Alaska State Trooper was over 2 hours away, and Alaska Department of Fish and Game personnel were involved in another wildlife incident near Juneau. The crew's initial curiosity had transformed into growing concern as they observed the bear's size and aggressive approach. Several members had encountered brown bears during previous assignments, but none had faced an animal of this size, showing such determined aggression toward their vehicle. Marcus continued attempting to maneuver the bus away from the approaching bear, but the road's narrow width and steep terrain severely limited his options. "This bear is not showing normal avoidance behavior," Maria Gonzalez announced while reviewing emergency protocols. "Everyone needs to remain calm and stay away from windows until we can determine his intentions. Bear spray and emergency supplies are available if needed, but our primary defense is the vehicle itself." Bear 47. Male continued his approach, now within 30 yards of the bus's front bumper. His massive head swayed from side to side as he analyzed the strange intruder in his territory, while his nose tested the air for scents that might indicate the nature of the threat. The bear's expression showed focused attention rather than fear, suggesting that he had made a deliberate decision to investigate or confront the bus rather than retreat to safer areas. Marcus made a final attempt to back the bus up the grade, but loose gravel caused the rear wheels to slip, and the bus lurched sideways toward the drop-off on the left side of the road. Correcting the skid required moving forward and straightening the vehicle's position, inadvertently reducing the distance between the bus and the approaching bear to less than 20 yards. At this critical distance, Bear 47 male's behavior shifted from investigative to aggressive. He lowered his head and accelerated his approach, closing the remaining distance with surprising speed for such a large animal. His massive paws thundered against the gravel surface as nearly 1,000 pounds of muscle and bone advanced on the stationary bus with clear, hostile intent. The first impact occurred at 7:54 a.m., when Bear 47 male struck the front of the bus with his right shoulder and forepaw. The collision generated a metallic crash that reverberated through the passenger compartment, followed immediately by the sound of breaking glass as the bear's claws raked across the front windshield. The reinforced safety glass held but developed a spider web of cracks that severely reduced Marcus's forward visibility. Inside the bus, 14 crew members experienced the violent rocking motion as nearly half a ton of bear impacted their vehicle. Several passengers were thrown from their seats despite wearing safety belts, while others gripped seat frames and overhead rails to maintain stability. The bus's reinforced construction absorbed much of the impact, but the sheer mass and power of the attacking bear exceeded design specifications for wildlife encounters. Bear 47 male reared up on his hind legs and brought both forepaws down on the bus's hood with tremendous force, denting the heavy-gauge steel and damaging the headlight assemblies and front grille. His claws, each over 4 inches long and sharp enough to tear through tree bark and animal hide, gouged deep scratches in the metal surface, while he attempted to gain purchase for another attack. Marcus attempted to drive forward past the bear, but Bear 47 male moved to block the bus's path, while continuing his assault on the vehicle's front end. The bear's agility surprised crew members who had expected such a large animal to be slow and cumbersome. Instead, he demonstrated the quick reflexes and coordination that made brown bears one of North America's most formidable predators. The second major impact came when Bear 47 male struck the driver's side of the bus with both forepaws, targeting the area where Marcus sat behind the steering wheel. The bear's claws scraped against the reinforced window mesh, while his weight caused the entire vehicle to rock violently on its suspension. The driver's side window cracked, but remained intact, though several crew members noted that the steel mesh was beginning to deform under the bear's assault. "Stay in your seats and hold on," Sarah Chen shouted over the noise of the attack, while attempting to maintain radio contact with headquarters. "The bus is designed to protect us from wildlife encounters. Do not attempt to exit the vehicle under any circumstances." Bear 47 male continued circling the bus while delivering powerful blows with his forepaws and attempting to bite tire and bumper components. His massive jaws, capable of exerting over 1,200 pounds per square inch of bite pressure, left deep puncture marks in rubber and plastic surfaces. The bear's persistence and aggression exceeded anything documented in previous wildlife encounters with logging vehicles. At 7:56 a.m., Bear 47 male moved to the rear of the bus and began attempting to access the emergency exit door. His claws raked across the metal surface while he pushed against the doorframe with his massive shoulder. The emergency exit had been designed to resist casual tampering, but was not intended to withstand assault by a 1,000-pound predator with 4-inch claws and unlimited determination. The rear emergency exit began showing signs of structural failure as Bear 47 male concentrated his attack on the door's locking mechanism and hinges. His claws found purchase in the rubber weather stripping around the door frame, allowing him to apply leverage that exceeded the door's design specifications. Crew members seated in the rear of the bus moved toward the front as they observed the bear's progress in compromising their vehicle's protective barrier. Tommy Nguyen, seated 3 rows from the rear, reported that the emergency exit door was beginning to separate from its frame as the bear's claws penetrated the weather stripping and began working on the metal locking mechanisms. "This door isn't going to hold much longer," he announced while moving toward the front of the bus. "That bear is strong enough to tear it right off its hinges." Maria Gonzalez began distributing bear spray canisters to crew members while reviewing procedures for bear encounters in confined spaces. The bus's interior offered limited room for maneuvering if the bear succeeded in breaching their protective barrier, and conventional wisdom about making noise and appearing large would be ineffective against an animal of Bear 47 male size and aggressive determination. Bear 47 Male's assault on the rear door intensified as he discovered that his claws could penetrate the weather stripping and begin working on the structural components underneath. His massive strength allowed him to bend and tear metal components that would resist normal human force, while his intelligence enabled him to focus his attacks on the weakest points in the door's construction. At 7:58 a.m., the rear emergency exit door's upper hinge began to fail under Bear 47 Male's assault. The combination of his enormous weight pushing against the door and his claws working at the mechanical components created stresses that exceeded the hardware's design limitations. A sharp metallic crack indicated that the hinge pin had sheared, leaving the door supported only by the lower hinge and the central locking mechanism. Inside the bus, crew members could hear the sounds of tearing metal and failing hardware as Bear 47 Male continued his systematic assault on their protective barrier. The bus rocked violently with each impact as the bear threw his full weight against the door frame while using his claws to work at the remaining mechanical components. Marcus attempted to drive forward again, hoping to dislodge the bear from the rear of the vehicle, but Bear 47 Male maintained his grip on the doorframe while the bus moved. The bear's claws had penetrated deeply enough into the metal and weather stripping that forward motion actually helped him tear the door away from its mounting points. "The door is coming apart," David Park shouted from his position near the front of the bus. "That bear is going to get inside." His voice reflected the growing panic among crew members who had initially believed their reinforced vehicle would provide adequate protection against wildlife encounters. Sarah Chen maintained radio contact with headquarters while coordinating the crew's response to the deteriorating situation. "Miller and Sons Base, this is Crew 7 Alpha. We have a large brown bear attacking our bus at mile marker 28 on Forest Service Road 2180. The bear has damaged the front end and is now trying to breach the rear emergency exit. We need immediate assistance from Alaska State Troopers and Fish and Game." The response from headquarters confirmed that emergency services had been notified but were at least 90 minutes away due to the remote location and difficult access conditions. Alaska State Troopers were responding from Sitka, while Alaska Department of Fish and Game personnel were being contacted to provide guidance on dealing with an aggressive brown bear in close contact with civilians. At 8:01 a.m., Bear 47 Male succeeded in tearing the rear emergency exit door completely away from its hinges and locking mechanism. The door fell away from the bus with a crash of twisted metal and broken glass, leaving a gaping opening that provided the massive bear with direct access to the passenger compartment. The 14 crew members found themselves face to face with nearly 1,000 pounds of enraged brown bear as Bear 47 Male's massive head appeared in the doorway. His dark eyes surveyed the interior of the bus, while his nose tested the air for scents that might indicate food sources or additional threats. Saliva dripped from his open mouth, revealing teeth designed for tearing flesh and crushing bones. Maria Gonzalez moved toward the rear of the bus with bear spray ready, while instructing crew members to remain calm and avoid sudden movements that might trigger an attack. "Everyone move toward the front slowly and quietly," she directed, while keeping the bear spray aimed at Bear 47 Male's face. "Do not run, do not scream, and do not make eye contact with the bear." Bear 47 Male began climbing into the bus through the destroyed rear exit, his massive bulk filling the doorway and blocking any escape route for crew members seated in the rear section. His weight caused the bus's rear suspension to compress significantly, while his claws scraped against metal flooring and seat frames as he worked his way into the passenger compartment. The bear's presence in the confined space created immediate panic among crew members who had no experience with brown bear encounters at close range. Several workers pressed against windows, while others climbed over seatbacks to increase their distance from the massive predator. The bus's interior designed to comfortably seat 18 passengers, suddenly seemed impossibly small, with a 1,000-pound bear occupying the rear section. Carlos Mendoza, seated in the rearmost row, found himself directly in Bear 47 Male's path as the massive animal entered the bus. The 19-year-old attempted to climb over his seat toward the front of the vehicle, but his movement attracted the bear's attention and triggered an aggressive response. Bear 47 Male lunged forward and struck Carlos with his right forepaw, sending the young man tumbling across 3 rows of seats before coming to rest against the left side of the bus. The bear's claws raked across Carlos's back and left shoulder, tearing through his heavy work jacket and creating deep lacerations that immediately began bleeding profusely. "Carlos is down!" Tommy Nguyen shouted while attempting to reach the injured crew member. "The bear got him with his claws!" Blood from Carlos's wounds began pooling on the bus floor as he lay motionless against the side wall, either unconscious from the impact or paralyzed by shock and terror. Maria Gonzalez discharged her bear spray at Bear 47 Male's face, creating a cloud of capsaicin-based irritant that should have deterred the animal's advance. However, the bus's confined space and poor ventilation caused the spray to affect crew members as well as the bear, creating additional chaos as everyone began coughing and experiencing burning sensations in their eyes and respiratory systems. Bear 47 Male recoiled from the bear spray but did not retreat from the bus. Instead, he shook his massive head and continued forward, his eyes streaming and his nose testing the air despite the chemical irritant. The bear's determination to defend his territory and food source overcame the temporary discomfort caused by the defensive spray. Michael Thompson, seated 4 rows from the rear, became Bear 47 Male's next target as the bear continued moving forward through the passenger compartment. The 41-year-old equipment operator attempted to climb over seats toward the front of the bus, but the bear's reach and speed made escape impossible in the confined space. Bear 47 Male struck Michael with both forepaws, knocking him to the floor between seat rows, where the bear could deliver additional attacks. The bear's claws penetrated Michael's heavy clothing and created deep wounds across his chest and arms, while the animal's weight pinned him to the floor, where he could not escape or defend himself. "Get that bear away from Michael!" Dutch Henderson shouted, while moving toward the rear of the bus with a fire extinguisher that he hoped might deter the animal's attack. However, Bear 47 Male's focus on his current victim made him unaware of other crew members' movements until they came within striking distance. The bear's assault on Michael Thompson continued for nearly 30 seconds, with the massive animal using claws and teeth to inflict severe injuries on the trapped crew member. Michael's screams echoed through the bus's interior as the bear's 4-inch claws raked across his body, opening wounds that would require immediate medical attention to prevent life-threatening blood loss. Lisa Reeves attempted to use the bus's radio system to coordinate emergency response while the attack continued in the rear of the vehicle. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Miller & Sons, Bus Unit 3 on Forest Service Road 2180. We have a brown bear inside our vehicle attacking crew members. We need immediate helicopter evacuation for seriously injured personnel." Alaska State Trooper Dispatch confirmed receipt of the emergency call and advised that helicopter rescue services were being contacted, but weather conditions and distance would delay response for at least 60 to 90 minutes. The crew would need to survive the bear attack and provide emergency medical care for injured members until professional help could arrive. Bear 47 Male released Michael Thompson and continued moving forward through the bus, apparently seeking additional threats or food sources. His massive bulk filled the aisle between seats, making it impossible for crew members to move past him toward either exit. The bear's presence effectively trapped everyone in the front half of the bus, while blocking access to emergency supplies stored in rear compartments. Kevin Santos, operating the bus's emergency communication system, succeeded in establishing contact with Alaska Department of Fish and Game wildlife specialists, who provided guidance on dealing with aggressive brown bears in confined spaces. "Do not attempt to fight or injure the bear," the specialist advised. "Brown bears will defend themselves aggressively if they feel threatened. Try to remain calm and avoid sudden movements until the bear loses interest and exits the vehicle." However, Bear 47 male showed no signs of losing interest in the bus or its occupants. His continued movement toward the front of the vehicle suggested that he perceived ongoing threats that required aggressive response. The bear's territorial instincts and protective behavior regarding his food source had been triggered by the bus's presence, and his assault would likely continue until he felt secure that the threat had been eliminated. Angela Morris, seated in the middle section of the bus, became Bear 47 male's next target as he continued his advance through the passenger compartment. The timber cruiser attempted to take refuge under her seat, but the bear's keen sense of smell allowed him to locate her position despite her efforts to remain hidden. Bear 47 male reached under the seat with one massive forepaw and dragged Angela into the aisle, where he could deliver a more effective attack. His claws penetrated her heavy clothing and created deep lacerations across her back and legs, while his teeth left puncture wounds on her shoulder and arm as he shook her like a dog with a toy. "Angela's bleeding badly," Sarah Chen reported while attempting to coordinate crew response to the ongoing attack. "We need medical supplies and immediate evacuation for multiple injured crew members." However, the bear's continued presence in the bus's aisle prevented access to first aid supplies stored in overhead compartments. Sandra White, seated near the front of the bus, began experiencing symptoms of shock as she witnessed the bear's systematic assault on her co-workers. The environmental compliance specialist had no experience with violent encounters and found herself unable to process the reality of watching a 1,000-pound predator mauling people she had worked alongside for months or years. Bear 47. Male's attack on Angela Morris continued for nearly 45 seconds before the bear released her and continued moving toward the front of the bus. Angela lay motionless in the aisle, blood pooling around her from multiple claw and bite wounds that would require immediate surgical intervention to prevent death from blood loss or infection. Dutch Henderson made a desperate attempt to drive the bear away from injured crew members by striking the animal with a fire extinguisher. However, Bear 47 male's thick hide and massive muscle structure absorbed the impacts without significant effect, while the attack only served to anger the bear and focus his attention on a new target. The bear turned on Dutch with explosive violence, striking the 52-year-old maintenance specialist with both forepaws and knocking him backward over 3 rows of seats. Dutch's head struck a window frame with enough force to cause immediate loss of consciousness, while the bear's claws opened deep wounds across his chest and arms. Dutch is unconscious and bleeding, David Park reported while attempting to reach the injured man. However, Bear 47 male continued standing over Dutch's motionless form, preventing other crew members from providing assistance or medical care. Marcus Rodriguez, still seated in the driver's position, attempted to restart the bus and drive away from the area despite the bear's presence inside the vehicle. However, Bear 47 male's weight distribution had affected the bus's balance and handling characteristics, making normal driving extremely difficult, even if the bear had not been actively attacking passengers. The bus's diesel engine started successfully, but acceleration caused Bear 47 male to lose his footing and fall against the left side of the vehicle. The bear's claws raked across window surfaces and seat frames as he attempted to regain his balance, while his weight caused the bus to lean dangerously toward the edge of the road. Maria Gonzalez made another attempt to use bear spray against Bear 47 male, but the confined space and presence of injured crew members made effective deployment impossible without causing additional harm to attack victims. The capsaicin-based spray had little visible effect on the massive bear, who seemed motivated by territorial instincts that overcame temporary discomfort. Bear 47 male began moving toward the front of the bus again, stepping over injured crew members while focusing on Marcus Rodriguez in the driver's seat. The bear apparently perceived the driver as a primary threat due to his control of the vehicle and his position at the front of the passenger compartment. Tommy Nguyen attempted to distract the bear by making noise and waving his arms, hoping to draw the animal's attention away from Marcus and the other injured crew members. However, Bear 47 male ignored the distraction and continued his advance toward the front of the bus with single-minded determination. At 8:07 a.m., Bear 47 male reached the front of the bus and struck Marcus Rodriguez with tremendous force, knocking the experienced driver from his seat and causing him to lose control of the vehicle. The bus veered sharply to the right as Marcus fell, heading directly toward the steep embankment that dropped 50 feet to Kazniku Creek below. The bus's right front wheel left the gravel road surface and began sliding down the embankment, causing the entire vehicle to tilt at a dangerous angle. Bear 47 male lost his footing as the bus tilted, sliding toward the right side of the vehicle along with several injured crew members who could not maintain their positions on the angled floor. Marcus Rodriguez, despite serious claw wounds across his back and shoulders, managed to grab the steering wheel and apply the brakes before the bus slid completely off the road. The vehicle came to rest at a 45-degree angle, with the right side hanging over the embankment and the left wheels still on the road surface. Bear 47, male, disoriented by the bus's sudden movement and changed angle, began attempting to exit through the destroyed rear door. However, the bus's tilted position made movement difficult even for such an agile animal, and the bear found himself sliding toward the lower right side of the vehicle. "The bus is going to roll!" Big Jim Patterson shouted from his position near the middle of the vehicle. "Everyone grab onto something solid and prepare for impact." The bus's precarious position on the embankment meant that any additional weight shift could cause the vehicle to roll completely over and tumble down to the creek below. Several crew members, including those who had been injured in the bear attack, found themselves sliding toward the right side of the tilted bus. The combination of gravity, blood loss, and shock made it difficult for attack victims to maintain stable positions or protect themselves from further injury during the potential rollover. Bear 47 male succeeded in reaching the destroyed rear exit and began climbing out of the bus, his massive weight causing additional stress on the vehicle's already precarious position. As the bear exited through the rear door, his weight shifted away from the right side of the bus, actually helping to stabilize the vehicle's position on the embankment. The massive bear dropped to the ground outside the bus and immediately began moving away from the vehicle, apparently satisfied that he had driven off the threat to his territory and food source. Bear 47 male's aggressive behavior had been triggered by the bus's proximity to his moose carcass, and the vehicle's damaged condition and injured occupants no longer represented a significant threat. Inside the tilted bus, Maria Gonzalez began triaging injured crew members while Sarah Chen coordinated emergency response efforts. 4 crew members had sustained serious injuries from the bear attack, including deep claw wounds, bite marks, and trauma from being thrown around the bus's interior during the assault. Carlos Mendoza remained unconscious from his initial encounter with Bear 47 male, with deep claw wounds across his back and shoulder that were bleeding profusely. His pulse was weak and rapid, indicating shock from blood loss, while his breathing remained shallow and irregular. Michael Thompson had sustained the most severe injuries during his prolonged encounter with the bear. Deep claw wounds across his chest and arms had severed muscle tissue and possibly damaged internal organs, while bite marks on his shoulder showed puncture wounds that penetrated to the bone. He remained conscious but was experiencing severe pain and symptoms of shock. Angela Morris lay motionless in the bus's aisle with multiple claw wounds across her back and legs, plus bite marks on her shoulder and arm from Bear 47 male's attack. Blood loss from her injuries was significant, and she had not regained consciousness since the bear's assault ended. Dutch Henderson had sustained head trauma when Bear 47 male knocked him backward over several seat rows, plus deep claw wounds across his chest and arms. He remained unconscious with possible concussion or skull fracture, while bleeding from his wounds continued despite Maria's efforts to apply pressure bandages. Marcos Rodriguez, despite his injuries from the bear's final attack, remained conscious and able to assist with emergency response coordination. His claw wounds across the back and shoulders were painful, but not immediately life-threatening, and his driving experience made him valuable for coordinating rescue efforts. The remaining crew members had sustained minor injuries during the bear attack and bus accident, primarily bruises and cuts from being thrown around the vehicle's interior. However, all were affected by shock and the psychological trauma of witnessing their co-workers being mauled by a 1,000-pound predator in confined space. At 8:14 a.m., Lisa Reeves succeeded in establishing radio contact with Alaska State Trooper Dispatch and provided detailed information about the crew's condition and location. We have 4 crew members with serious injuries from a brown bear attack, plus multiple personnel with minor injuries. Our bus is partially off the road and may roll if not stabilized. We need immediate helicopter evacuation and medical support. Alaska State Trooper Dispatch confirmed that helicopter rescue services had been contacted and were preparing to respond, but weather conditions and the remote location would delay arrival for at least 45 minutes. Ground-based emergency medical services were also responding, but faced even longer travel times due to the difficult access conditions on Forest Service Road 2180. Maria Gonzalez continued providing emergency medical care to injured crew members, using supplies from the bus's first aid kit and personal medical equipment she carried for wilderness emergencies. However, the severity of injuries sustained during the bear attack exceeded the capabilities of field first aid, and several crew members required immediate surgical intervention to survive. Sarah Chen coordinated with Alaska Department of Fish and Game personnel to ensure that Bear 47 male would not interfere with rescue operations. Wildlife specialists confirmed that the bear had likely returned to his moose carcass and would probably avoid the damaged bus unless provoked by rescue activities. The bus's tilted position on the embankment created additional challenges for rescue operations, as any significant weight change could cause the vehicle to roll completely over and potentially injure rescue personnel, as well as surviving crew members. Specialized equipment would be required to stabilize the bus before injured personnel could be safely evacuated. Tommy Nguyen used his cell phone to document the scene and injuries for insurance and legal purposes, while also providing real-time updates to headquarters about crew conditions and rescue requirements. His video footage would later prove valuable for wildlife specialists studying brown bear behavior and for improving safety protocols for logging operations in bear habitat. At 8:23 a.m., the sound of helicopter rotors became audible in the distance as Alaska State Trooper Aviation Unit responded to the emergency call. However, the dense forest canopy and steep terrain around the accident site would make helicopter landing extremely difficult, requiring rescue personnel to rappel to the scene or establish a landing zone in a more suitable location. Kevin Santos and David Park began preparing a landing zone by moving to an open area approximately 200 yards from the bus, where the helicopter could safely land without interference from power lines or tall trees. Their efforts included removing rocks and debris that could damage helicopter landing gear and marking the landing zone with emergency flares for pilot visibility. The Alaska State Trooper helicopter arrived at the scene at 8:31 a.m., piloted by Sergeant Michael Harrison with Alaska State Trooper Emergency Medical Technician Jennifer Walsh on board. Initial assessment from the air confirmed the bus's precarious position and the urgent need for medical evacuation of injured crew members. Due to terrain limitations, the helicopter established a landing zone approximately 150 yards from the bus accident site, requiring ground evacuation of injured personnel across difficult terrain. Sergeant Harrison radioed for additional ground support and specialized equipment to stabilize the bus and facilitate safe evacuation of attack victims. EMT Walsh rappelled to the bus location and immediately began advanced medical assessment and treatment of the 4 seriously injured crew members. Her evaluation confirmed that all 4 required immediate helicopter evacuation to trauma centers capable of treating severe claw wounds, bite injuries, and potential internal trauma. Carlos Mendoza's condition had deteriorated during the 23 minutes since the bear attack ended. His pulse was weak and thready, blood pressure was dangerously low, and his breathing had become increasingly labored. Deep claw wounds across his back and shoulder continued bleeding despite pressure bandages applied by Maria Gonzalez. EMT Walsh established intravenous access and began fluid resuscitation while preparing Carlos for helicopter evacuation. His injuries included deep muscle lacerations that would require surgical repair, possible internal bleeding from blunt force trauma, and significant blood loss that had resulted in hypovolemic shock. Michael Thompson remained conscious, but was experiencing severe pain from multiple claw wounds across his chest and arms. His injuries included muscle lacerations, possible arterial damage, and bite marks that had created puncture wounds penetrating to bone level. He would require immediate surgical intervention to control bleeding and prevent infection. Angela Morris had regained consciousness, but remained in severe pain from claw wounds across her back and legs, plus bite injuries to her shoulder and arm. Her wounds showed signs of muscle damage and possible nerve injury that could result in permanent disability without prompt surgical repair. Dutch Henderson remained unconscious with head trauma from his impact with the bus window frame, plus deep claw wounds across his chest and arms. EMT Walsh suspected possible skull fracture or brain injury, in addition to the severe lacerations that continued bleeding despite medical intervention. At 8:47 a.m., additional Alaska State Trooper personnel arrived at the scene along with Alaska Department of Fish and Game wildlife specialists who would ensure that Bear 47 male did not interfere with rescue operations. The bear had been observed returning to his moose carcass approximately 300 yards from the bus location. Specialized vehicle recovery equipment arrived with the ground support team, allowing rescue personnel to stabilize the bus and prevent further rollover while evacuating injured crew members. The bus's position on the steep embankment required careful coordination to avoid additional accidents during the rescue operation. The first helicopter evacuation flight departed at 8:52 a.m. with Carlos Mendoza and Michael Thompson, the 2 most seriously injured crew members. EMT Walsh accompanied the patients during transport to Sitka Community Hospital, where trauma teams had been alerted and were preparing to receive multiple bear attack victims. Angela Morris and Dutch Henderson were evacuated during the second helicopter flight at 9:14 a.m., accompanied by a second emergency medical technician who had arrived with the ground support team. Their injuries, while serious, were considered stable enough to allow brief delays during the complex evacuation process. Marcus Rodriguez and the remaining crew members who had sustained minor injuries were transported to Sitka Community Hospital by ground ambulance after being evacuated from the unstable bus. Their injuries included bruises, cuts, and psychological trauma from witnessing the bear attack, but none required immediate surgical intervention. The damaged bus remained on the embankment pending investigation by Alaska State Troopers, Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and insurance representatives. The vehicle's destroyed rear exit, damaged front end, and extensive claw marks provided dramatic evidence of Bear 47 male's assault on the crew and their vehicle. Initial damage assessment indicated that Bus Unit 3 was a total loss, with repair costs exceeding the vehicle's replacement value. The Bear's assault had caused structural damage to the passenger compartment, destroyed safety systems, and created conditions that would make the vehicle unsafe for future operations, even if repairs were economically feasible. At Sitka Community Hospital, trauma teams led by Dr. Sarah Mitchell and Dr. James Patterson began treating the 4 seriously injured crew members. The hospital's emergency department had been alerted about the incoming bear attack victims and had prepared operating rooms, blood supplies, and specialist surgeons for the complex cases. Carlos Mendoza was taken directly to Operating Room 1 for emergency surgery to control bleeding from deep claw wounds across his back and shoulder. Surgical exploration revealed muscle lacerations, damaged blood vessels, and tissue trauma that would require multiple procedures to repair completely. Dr. Mitchell noted that Carlos's injuries were consistent with brown bear attacks, showing the characteristic pattern of 4 parallel claw wounds plus additional trauma from the bear's powerful forepaws. These injuries demonstrate the incredible strength and destructive capability of large brown bears, she observed, while working to repair damaged muscle tissue. Michael Thompson underwent surgery in Operating Room 2 to address multiple claw wounds across his chest and arms, plus bite marks on his shoulder that had created puncture wounds penetrating to bone level. His injuries required careful debridement to remove debris and prevent infection, plus vascular repair to restore blood flow to damaged areas. The surgical team noted that Michael's bite wounds showed the characteristic crushing injury pattern associated with brown bear attacks. Brown bears have bite pressures exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch, explained Dr. Patterson. These injuries typically involve significant tissue damage beyond what's immediately visible. Angela Morris required surgical repair of claw wounds across her back and legs, plus treatment of bite injuries to her shoulder and arm. Her injuries included muscle lacerations, possible nerve damage, and extensive soft tissue trauma that would require skin grafts and extended rehabilitation. Dr. Mitchell's surgical notes indicated that Angela's wounds showed defensive injury patterns, suggesting she had attempted to protect herself during Bear 47 male's attack. These injuries are consistent with the victim trying to shield vital areas while the bear was attacking, she documented for legal and insurance purposes. Dutch Henderson underwent emergency neurosurgery to address head trauma sustained when Bear 47 male knocked him backward over several bus seats. CT scans revealed skull fracture and brain swelling that required immediate surgical intervention to prevent permanent brain damage or death. Neurosurgeon Dr. Robert Chen noted that Dutch's head trauma was severe enough to require intensive care monitoring and possible additional surgeries depending on his response to initial treatment. Head injuries from brown bear attacks often involve significant blunt force trauma that can cause life-threatening complications, he explained to family members. By 2:30 p.m. on November 22, 2024, all 4 seriously injured crew members had undergone initial surgical procedures and were in stable but critical condition in Sitka Community Hospital's intensive care unit. Medical staff indicated that additional surgeries would be required for all 4 patients, with recovery times measured in months rather than weeks. Hospital Administrator Janet Wilson announced that the facility was well equipped to handle bear attack victims due to its location in Alaska, where such incidents occurred several times per year. Our trauma team has extensive experience treating injuries from wildlife encounters, including brown bear attacks, moose encounters, and other wilderness-related trauma. The 10 crew members who sustained minor injuries during the bear attack and bus accident were treated in the hospital's emergency department and released after observation. Their injuries included bruises, cuts, minor lacerations, and psychological trauma that would require ongoing counseling and support services. Alaska State Troopers began their investigation of the incident at 3:45 p.m., interviewing crew members who were able to provide statements about the bear attack and reviewing physical evidence from the scene. Trooper Sergeant David Anderson noted that the attack appeared to be defensive behavior triggered by the bus's proximity to the bear's food source. Initial evidence suggests this was a territorial response by a large brown bear defending a moose carcass, Sergeant Anderson reported. The bear's behavior was consistent with defensive aggression rather than predatory hunting, which explains why the attack ended when the bear felt the threat had been eliminated. Alaska Department of Fish and Game Wildlife Specialist Dr. Linda Peterson arrived at the scene at 4:20 p.m. to assess bear 47 male's behavior and determine whether the animal posed ongoing threats to public safety. Her initial observations confirmed that the bear had returned to feeding on the moose carcass and was showing normal post-encounter behavior. This bear responded predictably to what he perceived as a threat to his food source during the critical pre-hibernation period, Dr. Peterson explained. Brown bears defend high-value food sources aggressively, especially large carcasses that represent significant caloric intake during the season when they're preparing for winter dormancy. The investigation revealed that bear 47 male had been feeding on the moose carcass for at least 3 days before the bus encounter, based on evidence at the feeding site and tracks in the surrounding area. The bear's aggressive response was triggered by the bus's approach to within 200 yards of his food source during the critical morning feeding period. Miller and Sons Forestry issued a statement at 6:30 p.m. confirming the bear attack and expressing concern for injured employees while cooperating fully with official investigations. Company President Robert Miller noted that the incident represented the most serious wildlife encounter in the company's 37-year operating history. Our primary concern is the welfare of our employees and their families, Miller stated. We are providing full support for medical treatment, recovery, and rehabilitation for all affected personnel. We are also reviewing our safety protocols and working with wildlife authorities to prevent similar incidents in the future. The company's safety record had been exemplary prior to the November 22nd incident, with no serious wildlife encounters despite operating in areas with high brown bear populations. Miller and Sons had invested heavily in reinforced vehicles, safety training, and emergency response equipment specifically to protect employees from wildlife hazards. Insurance representatives from Consolidated Risk Management arrived at the scene on November 23rd to assess property damage and coordinate coverage for medical expenses, vehicle replacement, and potential liability claims. Initial damage estimates exceeded $400,000 for the destroyed bus alone, with medical expenses projected to reach several $100,000. The destroyed bus required specialized equipment for removal from the embankment where it had come to rest during the bear attack. Recovery operations were complicated by the vehicle's weight, the steep terrain, and the need to preserve evidence for ongoing investigations by multiple agencies. Media coverage of the incident began within hours of the attack, with local television stations reporting the bear encounter and providing updates on the injured crew members' conditions. The story quickly gained national attention due to the dramatic nature of a brown bear destroying a reinforced vehicle and injuring multiple occupants. Alaska Public Media interviewed Dr. Peterson about brown bear behavior and the circumstances that led to such an aggressive encounter. This incident demonstrates why Alaska maintains strict protocols for human activities in bear habitat, she explained. Even reinforced vehicles can't provide complete protection against large brown bears under certain circumstances. The story was picked up by national news networks within 24 hours, with reports focusing on the dramatic nature of a 1,000-pound bear destroying a reinforced bus and the severe injuries sustained by crew members. Video footage taken by Tommy Nguyen during the initial stages of the encounter provided compelling documentation of the bear's size and aggressive behavior. Wildlife documentarian Dr. Michael Stevens noted that the incident provided rare documentation of brown bear territorial behavior during the pre-hibernation period. This footage shows the incredible strength and determination of brown bears defending high-value food sources, he observed. It also demonstrates why human activities in bear habitat require extreme caution during critical feeding periods. On November 24th, Alaska Department of Fish and Game announced that Bear 47 male would not be destroyed or relocated, based on their assessment that his behavior was normal defensive response to perceived threats. The bear had returned to normal feeding behavior and showed no signs of becoming habituated to human contact or developing aggressive tendencies beyond the specific incident. This bear responded predictably to what he perceived as a threat to his food source, Dr. Peterson announced. Destroying or relocating the animal would not improve public safety and would remove a healthy breeding male from the ecosystem without justification. The decision generated controversy among some members of the public who felt that any bear that attacked humans should be destroyed regardless of circumstances. However, wildlife management professionals supported the decision based on established protocols for distinguishing between defensive and predatory bear behavior. Legal proceedings began on November 26th when attorneys representing injured crew members filed preliminary notices of potential lawsuits against Miller & Sons Forestry, the bus manufacturer, and other parties potentially responsible for the incident. The legal actions focused on allegations of inadequate safety measures and failure to protect employees from known wildlife hazards. Attorney Margaret Davidson, representing Carlos Mendoza's family, argued that Miller & Sons had failed to provide adequate protection for employees working in areas with documented brown bear activity. This company knew that large brown bears were present in the work area but failed to take appropriate precautions to protect their employees, she stated. Miller & Sons legal counsel responded that the company had exceeded industry standards for wildlife protection and that the incident represented an unprecedented encounter that could not have been anticipated based on previous experience. The company's safety record and investment in protective equipment supported their position that appropriate precautions had been taken. The bus manufacturer, Specialty Vehicle Systems, faced potential liability claims based on allegations that their reinforced vehicle had failed to provide adequate protection against wildlife encounters. Company engineers argued that the bus had performed within design specifications and that no vehicle could withstand assault by a 1,000-pound bear with unlimited determination. Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration investigators arrived on November 27th to assess whether workplace safety violations had contributed to the incident. OSHA's investigation would focus on Miller & Sons safety protocols, training programs, and compliance with federal regulations for protecting employees from workplace hazards, including wildlife encounters. The investigation was complicated by the fact that current OSHA regulations provided limited guidance for protecting employees from wildlife attacks in remote locations. Most workplace safety standards focused on industrial hazards rather than encounters with large predators in wilderness environments. By December 1st, 2024, medical updates indicated that all 4 seriously injured crew members were making progress in their recovery, though additional surgeries and extended rehabilitation would be required. Carlos Mendoza had undergone 3 surgical procedures to repair muscle damage and remained in intensive care with complications related to infection risk. Michael Thompson's injuries required 2 additional surgeries to address vascular damage and restore function to his left arm. Doctors indicated that he would likely experience permanent limitations in arm mobility due to muscle and nerve damage sustained during the bear attack. Angela Morris faced the longest recovery period due to extensive soft tissue damage and possible nerve injuries that could result in permanent disability. Her injuries required skin grafts and physical therapy that would continue for at least 6 months, with no guarantee of complete functional recovery. Dutch Henderson's head trauma had stabilized, but neurological assessments indicated possible cognitive impairment and memory problems that could affect his ability to return to work. His recovery would require extensive rehabilitation and ongoing monitoring for delayed complications from brain injury. The psychological impact of the bear attack affected all crew members, including those who sustained only minor physical injuries. Several employees required ongoing counseling to address post-traumatic stress symptoms related to witnessing their co-workers being mauled by a massive predator in confined space. Miller and Sons established a victim support fund to provide financial assistance for medical expenses, lost wages, and rehabilitation costs not covered by insurance. The company also implemented enhanced safety protocols, including wildlife monitoring systems, improved communication equipment, and modified work schedules to reduce exposure to wildlife during peak activity periods. Alaska Department of Fish and Game used the incident to develop improved guidelines for human activities in brown bear habitat during critical feeding periods. The new protocols included enhanced monitoring requirements, modified transportation routes, and improved coordination between land management agencies and private companies operating in bear habitat. The November 22, 2024 bear attack on Miller & Sons Bus Unit 3 became a case study for wildlife management professionals, emergency responders, and transportation safety experts. The incident demonstrated the need for continued vigilance and improved safety measures when humans operate in wilderness areas occupied by large predators. Bear 47 male continued living in the Kasniku Creek watershed, with periodic monitoring by Alaska Department of Fish and Game personnel confirming normal behavior patterns. The massive bear entered hibernation in mid-December 2024, approximately 3 weeks later than typical due to the abundant food sources that had contributed to his aggressive defense of the moose carcass. The destroyed bus was eventually removed from the embankment and transported to a salvage facility where insurance investigators and safety experts could conduct detailed examinations of the damage. The vehicle's remains provided valuable data for improving protective equipment and understanding the destructive capability of large brown bears. Recovery operations required specialized heavy equipment and careful coordination to prevent environmental damage to Kasniku Creek and surrounding forest areas. The total cost of bus recovery, site remediation, and road repairs exceeded $180,000, adding to the overall financial impact of the incident. Tommy Nguyen's video footage of the bear attack was studied by wildlife behaviorists and used in training programs for emergency responders and wildlife management personnel. The footage provided rare documentation of brown bear aggression patterns and the effectiveness of various defensive measures. Educational programs developed from the incident emphasized the importance of understanding brown bear behavior. particularly during the pre-hibernation period when bears become increasingly aggressive in defending food sources. The programs were implemented in schools, outdoor recreation organizations, and companies operating in bear habitat. 6 months after the attack, Carlos Mendoza had undergone 7 surgical procedures and was beginning physical therapy to restore mobility and strength to his injured back and shoulder. Medical expenses for his care exceeded $340,000, with additional costs projected for ongoing rehabilitation and potential disability accommodation. Michael Thompson returned to limited work duties in April 2025, though permanent nerve damage in his left arm prevented him from operating heavy equipment. Miller and Sons provided alternative employment that accommodated his physical limitations while maintaining his salary and benefits. Angela Morris faced the most challenging recovery, with nerve damage in her legs, requiring extensive physical therapy and possible additional surgeries. Her medical team indicated that full recovery was unlikely, and she might require permanent mobility assistance for certain activities. Dutch Henderson's cognitive function had improved significantly by March 2025, though he continued experiencing memory problems and concentration difficulties that prevented return to his previous responsibilities. His family pursued legal action against multiple parties, claiming that head trauma had permanently affected his quality of life. The legal proceedings continued through 2025, with discovery processes revealing extensive documentation about brown bear activity in the area and previous safety concerns that had been raised by employees and wildlife authorities. Settlement negotiations began in summer 2025, with total claims exceeding $2.3 million for medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, and punitive damages. Miller and Sons' insurance coverage proved adequate for medical expenses and property damage, but the company faced significant premium increases and additional safety requirements that affected operating costs. The incident also damaged the company's reputation and made recruitment of experienced workers more difficult. The broader impact of the November 22, 2024 bear attack extended beyond the immediate victims and their families to influence safety protocols, insurance requirements, and regulatory oversight for companies operating in Alaska's wilderness areas. The incident demonstrated that even well-prepared organizations could face catastrophic encounters with wildlife that exceeded all previous experience and planning. Wildlife management authorities used lessons learned from the attack to develop improved protocols for managing human-bear conflicts in areas where resource extraction activities brought workers into contact with large predator populations. The new guidelines emphasized timing restrictions, enhanced monitoring, and improved coordination between agencies responsible for wildlife management and worker safety. Emergency response agencies incorporated lessons from the rescue operation into training programs for wilderness emergencies involving multiple casualties and unstable vehicles. The complex rescue had required coordination between Alaska State Troopers, emergency medical services, wildlife management personnel, and specialized recovery equipment operators. The November 22, 2024 attack by Bear 47 male on Miller and Sons Bus Unit 3 remained one of the most thoroughly documented brown bear encounters in Alaska history, providing valuable data for scientists, safety professionals, and policymakers working to reduce risks associated with human activities in wilderness areas occupied by large predators. The incident served as a sobering reminder that Alaska's wilderness retained its wild character and that human activities in bear habitat carried inherent risks that could not be completely eliminated through technology, planning, or safety protocols. The courage and professionalism displayed by crew members during the attack and by emergency responders during the rescue operation demonstrated the human capacity to survive and recover from even the most traumatic encounters with nature's most powerful predators. 1 year after the attack, Bear 47 male continued to live in the Kazniku Creek watershed, his presence monitored by wildlife authorities who used him as an example of successful bear management that balanced human safety concerns with conservation objectives. The massive bear's behavior had returned to normal patterns following the November incident, supporting the scientific understanding that the attack had been a defensive response rather than predatory aggression. The 4 seriously injured crew members continued their recovery processes, each facing unique challenges and adaptations required by their injuries. Their experiences highlighted the long-term consequences of wildlife encounters and the importance of comprehensive support systems for attack victims and their families. The destroyed bus was eventually processed as scrap metal, but components showing bear damage were preserved for educational purposes and ongoing research into wildlife-resistant transportation equipment. The vehicle's failure to protect its occupants led to design improvements in subsequent models and enhanced testing protocols for equipment intended for use in predator habitat. Miller and Sons Forestry continued operations in Alaska's wilderness areas, but implemented significant changes in safety protocols, equipment specifications, and employee training based on lessons learned from the November 22, 2024 attack. The company's commitment to employee safety was strengthened by the traumatic experience, even as operational costs increased due to enhanced safety measures. The legacy of the November 22, 2024 brown bear attack extended far beyond the immediate participants to influence wildlife management policies, transportation safety standards, emergency response protocols, and public understanding of the risks and rewards associated with human activities in Alaska's magnificent but dangerous wilderness areas, where encounters between humans and apex predators remained an ever-present reality.